When millionaire rancher Grant Holloway finally rides through the gates of his Texas estate after 2 years of running from grief, he expects silence. The cold, hollow kind that's haunted him since his wife died in childbirth. Instead, he hears a woman's voice singing Lila's private lullaby, the one nobody else knew, drifting like a ghost through his daughter's nursery window. He takes the stairs 3 at a time, heart hammering, and freezes in the doorway. A stranger sits in the rocking chair, cradling his 2-year-old daughter against her chest, singing words that should have died with his wife. And the child he abandoned is finally, peacefully asleep. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Stick with me to the end, because what happens next will break your heart wide open before it puts it back together. The Texas sky stretched wide and merciless overhead, bleached white by the afternoon sun. Grant Holloway sat motionless in the saddle, one hand resting on the horn, the other loose on the reins. Before him, the iron gates of his ranch stood open like a mouth that had forgotten how to close. Beyond them, the long drive wound between post oaks and limestone outcroppings toward the house, a 2-story structure of whitewashed wood and native stone that had once felt like a kingdom. Now it looked like a mausoleum. 2 years. 730 days since he'd ridden away from this place with Lila's blood still under his fingernails and her last breath still echoing in his ears. 730 nights sleeping under unfamiliar skies, working other men's cattle, spending his money in other men's towns, anything to avoid coming back to the house where his wife had died, bringing their daughter into a world he couldn't bear to face. The horse shifted beneath him, tired from the long ride. Grant didn't move. Couldn't move. Not yet. He'd left Rosie, 8 hours old, screaming, red-faced, alive, in the arms of Mrs. Kellen, the housekeeper who'd served his family for 20 years. He'd signed papers giving her full authority over the household and the child. He'd written checks, sent money from every town between here and the Oklahoma Territory. He'd done everything a father could do except the one thing that mattered. He hadn't been a father at all. "You gonna sit there all day, or you gonna go see what you left behind?" The voice in his head sounded like Lila's, sharp-edged and practical. She'd never had patience for self-pity, even his own, especially his own. Grant gathered the reins and nudged the horse forward. The animal moved reluctantly, sensing its rider's mood. They passed through the gates and started down the drive. Dust rose in small clouds beneath the hooves, settling on Grant's boots and the legs of his trousers. He'd dressed carefully that morning in the town where he'd spent the night, shaved, put on a clean shirt, tried to look like a man who belonged in his own home. Now, 6 hours in the saddle later, he looked like exactly what he was, a stranger returning to a place he no longer had the right to claim. The house grew larger as he approached. Nothing had changed. The porch still needed painting. The shutters still hung slightly crooked on the upper windows. The flower beds Lila had planted were overgrown now, wild roses tangling with Mexican hat and Indian blanket. But the house stood solid, the roof intact, smoke rising from the kitchen chimney. Someone was keeping it alive. Mrs. Kellen, probably. She'd always been efficient, capable, the kind of woman who could run a household with one hand tied behind her back and still have supper on the table at 6 o'clock sharp. Grant swung down from the saddle and tied the horse to the porch rail. His legs felt unsteady beneath him. He'd been in the saddle since dawn, but that wasn't what made him feel like the ground was shifting. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at the front door, dark wood with a brass knocker shaped like a longhorn, and tried to remember how to breathe. "You're being a coward," Lila's voice said in his head. "I know," he whispered. He climbed the steps, put his hand on the door, turned the knob. The house smelled like beeswax and coffee and something baking, not like death, not like the copper penny stink of blood and the sweet sick smell of childbed fever. Just home. Normal. As if the worst night of his life had never happened within these walls. Grant stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. The entrance hall looked the same, the long table with its silver tray for calling cards, the mirror above it, the coat rack where his duster and hat had once hung beside Lila's shawls. Now there was only a woman's plain gray shawl and a child-sized coat with wooden buttons. His throat closed up. "Mr. Holloway." He turned. Mrs. Kellen stood in the doorway to the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She was 60 if she was a day, iron gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, face lined by sun and hard work. Her expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Kellen," Grant said. His voice came out rough, unused to speaking. "I should have sent word I was coming." "Yes," she said flatly. "You should have." She looked him up and down, taking inventory. "You look like hell. I've been riding since— I don't mean today." Her eyes were hard. "I mean the last 2 years. You look like a man who's been trying to drink himself to death and hasn't quite managed it." Grant flinched. He deserved that. Deserved worse. "How is she?" he asked. "Rosie, how is my daughter?" Mrs. Kellen's expression didn't soften. "She's upstairs, sleeping, which is more than she's done most days since you left." She paused, and something flickered across her face. Anger, maybe, or disappointment. "She's alive, if that's what you're asking. Growing. Healthy enough, considering she spent her first year crying herself sick every night because she didn't understand why her father never came." The words hit him like fists. Grant's hands curled at his sides. "Mrs. Kellen, I don't want to hear it," she cut him off. "I don't want your excuses or your grief or your guilt. I kept her alive like you paid me to do. That's all. If you want more than that, you'll have to ask someone else." She turned and walked back into the kitchen, leaving Grant standing alone in the hall. He stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding against his ribs. Then slowly, he made himself move toward the stairs. The second floor was dim and quiet. 4 doors opened off the landing. The master bedroom, his and Lila's, stood at the end of the hall, door closed. He couldn't look at it, not yet. Maybe not ever. Instead, he turned toward the nursery, the room they'd prepared together during Lila's last months, painting the walls pale yellow, building the cradle by hand, filling it with quilts and hopes and plans that had died with her. He stopped outside the door and heard singing. Grant's breath stopped in his chest. The voice was soft, barely audible through the wood, but it carried a melody he knew as well as his own heartbeat. Lila's Lullaby, the one she'd made up during her pregnancy, humming it while she worked, singing it to her belly in the evenings when they sat together on the porch. She'd never written it down, never taught it to anyone. It had been hers alone, a private conversation between mother and child. But someone was singing it now. His hand shook as he pushed the door open. The nursery was exactly as he'd left it, but different. The yellow walls seemed softer somehow, the afternoon light filtering through lace curtains that definitely hadn't been there before. A small table held a wash basin and folded cloths. The cradle stood empty. Rosie would be too big for it now, and in its place, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt. And in the rocking chair by the window, backlit by golden sun, a woman sat with a child in her arms. Not Mrs. Kellen. Someone younger, slender. Dark hair pulled back from a face he couldn't quite see in the light. She wore a simple gray dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and she rocked slowly back and forth, singing Lila's melody in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken and carefully mended. The child, his daughter, Rosie, though he barely recognized her, so much bigger than the squalling infant he'd left behind, was asleep against the woman's shoulder, one small hand fisted in the fabric of her dress, her face peaceful and trusting. Grant must have made a sound, a breath, a step, something, because the singing stopped. The woman's head turned. Her face came into focus. She was young, mid-20s maybe, pale skin and dark eyes and a face that would have been pretty if it hadn't looked so tired, so worn down by something more than just physical labor. She met his gaze without flinching, without apology, and didn't move to wake the child. "Who are you?" Grant asked. His voice came out harder than he meant it to. "Mercy Hale," she said quietly. "I'm the new maid, sir. I've been caring for your daughter." Mrs. Kellen didn't mention— Mrs. Kellen doesn't tell you everything. Mercy's voice was soft but steady. "She hired me 4 months ago. I came looking for work and she needed help with the child." Grant's eyes went to Rosie. The baby, no, not a baby anymore, a toddler, slept deeply, her breathing slow and even. Her hair was brown like Lila's, curling at the ends. Her hands were small and perfect. How? He had to stop, clear his throat. How did you know that song? Mercy looked down at the child in her arms. I didn't, she said. Not at first. But your daughter, she doesn't sleep easily, Mr. Holloway. She cries. Terrible, heartbroken crying that nothing stops. Not food, not rocking, not walking, not any of the usual things. Mrs. Kellen tried everything. I tried everything. And then one night, I started humming, making up a melody, and she quieted. The next night, I hummed it again, and she slept. The night after that, I added words, just simple ones. Sleep now, little one. Morning comes soon, stars watch above you, moon knows your name. She paused, her throat working. I didn't know it was your wife's song. Not until Mrs. Kellen heard me one evening and went pale as death. She said I couldn't have learned it from anyone because Mrs. Holloway never sang it outside this room. But I swear to you, sir, I never heard it before. I just found it, like it was waiting to be found. Grant stared at her. At this stranger holding his daughter, singing the melody Lila had created, as if she'd somehow pulled it out of the air between the living and the dead. That's not possible, he said. Mercy met his eyes. I know, but it's true anyway. They stood there in the golden light, neither moving, while Rosie breathed soft and steady in the space between them. Grant felt something cracking open in his chest, something that grief had sealed shut 2 years ago and nothing had been able to touch since. Anger, maybe. Or guilt. Or something worse than either. Why are you really here? He asked. Mercy's jaw tightened. I told you. I needed work. Where's your family? Your husband? Dead, she said simply. My husband died of fever last winter. My father was shot during the war for helping wounded soldiers, regardless of which side they fought for. I have no one, Mr. Holloway. No family, no home. Mrs. Kellen offered me room and board in exchange for helping with the house and your daughter. That's the whole truth. Grant wanted to call her a liar, wanted to demand she tell him how she really knew Lila's song, what game she was playing, what she wanted from him. But when he looked at her, really looked, all he saw was exhaustion, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long with no place to put it down. And Rosie slept. Peacefully. For the first time in God knew how long, his daughter was sleeping. Does she do this often? He asked, his voice rough. Sleep like this? Only when I sing, Mercy said quietly. Mrs. Kellen says she used to sleep fine as a newborn, but after a few months she stopped. Cried all night, every night. They thought she was sick, but the doctor couldn't find anything wrong. And then I came and I sang, and she looked down at the child. She sleeps. Grant's hands curled into fists at his sides. He'd abandoned his daughter, left her screaming and alone while he ran from his own pain. And this stranger, this woman he'd never met, had given her what he couldn't. Peace, comfort, something that looked, from where he stood, a hell of a lot like love. I should take her, he said, moving forward. Put her to bed. Mercy shook her head slightly. If you wake her now, she'll cry. She always cries when she wakes suddenly. Better to let her sleep a while longer, sir. She's my daughter. Yes, Mercy's voice didn't change. She is, but she doesn't know that yet. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. Grant stopped, frozen halfway across the room. She doesn't know me, he said. No, sir, she doesn't. He stood there, looking at the child who carried his blood, his name, his wife's face, and saw nothing of himself in her at all. Rosie belonged to this room, to this stranger's arms, to a lullaby that shouldn't exist but did. I'll leave you alone, Mercy said softly. I'll put her down in a few minutes when she's deep enough under. You can sit with her then, if you like. I don't need your permission to sit with my own child. No, sir. Mercy's eyes were steady on his. You don't, but she needs to sleep more than you need to hold her right now. That's just the truth. Grant wanted to argue, wanted to rage, wanted to do something, anything, to crack through the terrible calm in this woman's voice. But he couldn't, because she was right, and because the child in her arms was finally at peace. He turned and walked out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. Downstairs, Mrs. Kellen was nowhere to be found. Grant stood in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the table, trying to breathe through the storm building in his chest. The room looked exactly as it always had. Cast iron stove, long wooden table, shelves of dishes and jars. Ordinary. Normal. As if 2 years hadn't passed. As if Lila hadn't died. As if he hadn't run like a coward and left his daughter to be raised by strangers. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Light ones. Mercy. She appeared in the doorway, still wearing that simple gray dress, her hands clasped in front of her. Without the child in her arms, she looked even smaller, more fragile. "She's in her bed," Mercy said. "She'll sleep another hour or two, probably. You can go up now if you want." Grant didn't move. "How long have you been here?" 4 months, like I said. "And in those 4 months, you learned my wife's song, got my daughter to trust you, and made yourself indispensable in my house." Mercy's expression didn't change. "I did my job, sir. That's all." "Your job was to care for a child, not to—" He stopped, searching for words. "Not to replace her mother." "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Mercy said quietly. "I'm just trying to help a little girl sleep at night. That's all I've ever done." "Then why that song?" Grant's voice rose. "Out of all the songs in the world, why that one?" "I don't know." For the first time, emotion cracked through her calm. "I've asked myself the same question 100 times. I don't know why it came to me. I don't know why it's the only thing that works. I just know it does, and I keep singing it because your daughter needs it. If you want me to stop, if you want me to leave, I will. But you'll have to explain to that child why the only person who can help her sleep is walking out the door." They stared at each other across the kitchen table. Grant's chest heaved. Mercy stood perfectly still, chin up, eyes dry, waiting for judgment. "Mrs. Kellen should have told me," Grant said finally. "Mrs. Kellen doesn't answer to you anymore, sir. You made that clear when you left her in charge and didn't come back for 2 years." "I sent money." "Money's not the same as a father." Mercy's voice was still quiet, but steel ran through it now. "Your daughter is 2 years old. She's learning to talk, to walk, to be a person, and she doesn't know you. That's not my fault. That's not Mrs. Kellen's fault. That's yours." The words hung in the air between them, brutal and true. Grant wanted to hit something, wanted to throw her out, wanted to do anything except stand here and take the truth from a woman who had no right to speak it. But she did have the right. Because she'd done what he couldn't. She'd stayed. "How much is Mrs. Kellen paying you?" he asked, his voice flat. "Room and board, no wages." "That's exploitation." "That's survival," Mercy corrected. "I was grateful for it." Grant pulled out his wallet, extracted several bills, and laid them on the table. "That's for the last 4 months, and there'll be more. Regular wages. You'll be paid like any other employee." Mercy looked at the money but didn't touch it. "I don't need your charity, Mr. Holloway." "It's not charity. It's wages for work done. Take it." She hesitated, then reached out and picked up the bills, folding them carefully. "Thank you." Grant nodded once, sharply. Then he turned and walked back toward the stairs. At the bottom, he paused. "Miss Hale." "Yes, sir?" "When she wakes up, don't tell her who I am. Not yet. I want her to get used to seeing me around first." There was a long silence. Then, softly, "Yes, sir. If that's what you think is best." "I don't know what's best," Grant said, "but I know I can't just walk in and expect her to call me Papa when she doesn't even know my face." "That's wise, Mr. Holloway." He started up the stairs, then stopped again. "And Miss Hale, keep singing that song. Whatever it is, wherever it came from, keep singing it. If it helps her sleep, then it's the only thing that matters." "Yes, sir." Grant climbed the rest of the stairs and walked to the nursery door. He stood outside for a long moment, his hand on the knob, listening to the silence within. Then, carefully, quietly, he opened the door and stepped inside. Rosie lay in her small bed, turned on her side, one hand tucked under her cheek. The afternoon light had shifted, falling across her face in bars of gold and shadow. She looked like Lila, the same curve to her cheek, the same dark lashes. But she also looked like herself, like someone entirely new, someone he didn't know yet. Grant moved closer and knelt beside the bed. His knees protested. He'd been in the saddle too long, slept on too many hard grounds. But he ignored the ache and just looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for the first time since the night she was born. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Rosie, I'm so sorry." The child didn't stir, didn't wake, didn't know he was there. Grant reached out with one shaking hand and touched her hair, just once, just briefly. It was soft as dandelion fluff, warm from sleep. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be your father, but I'm here now, I'm here, and I'm not leaving again. That's a promise." Rosie slept on, oblivious to the promises being made over her head. Grant sat there until his knees went numb and the light began to fade. Finally, he stood, bent down, and pressed a kiss to his daughter's forehead, the first he'd ever given her. Then he turned and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of limbo. Grant moved through his own house like a ghost, careful not to disturb anything, not to claim too much space. Mrs. Kellen treated him with cold efficiency, serving meals at regular hours and answering direct questions, but offering nothing beyond the bare minimum. Mercy was even more careful, moving through her duties quietly, keeping Rosie occupied and away from Grant except during meals. He watched them. Watched how Rosie followed Mercy everywhere, her small hand tucked into Mercy's skirt, her eyes always checking to make sure the woman was nearby. Watched how Mercy moved with the child, patient, gentle, never raising her voice even when Rosie was fussy or difficult. Watched how his daughter, who should have been his, belonged so completely to this stranger that it made his chest ache. On the 4th day, Grant was working in the barn when he heard shouting from the house. He dropped the bridle he'd been mending and ran Mrs. Kellen stood in the kitchen doorway, her face red with rage, holding something small and silver in her hand. Mercy stood across from her, pale but steady, her arms wrapped around herself. Rosie clung to Mercy's skirts, crying. "What's going on?" Grant demanded. Mrs. Kellen turned to him, triumph blazing in her eyes. "I'll tell you what's going on, Mr. Holloway. This girl is a thief. I found your father's watch hidden in her room." Grant's blood went cold. The watch, a silver pocket watch with the Holloway brand engraved on the back, had been his father's, his grandfather's before that. It had sat on his dresser since the day he'd moved into the master bedroom, and he'd forgotten about it completely in the chaos of the last 2 years. "That's not possible," he said slowly. "I found it in her things," Mrs. Kellen insisted. She held up the watch, letting it catch the light. "Wrapped in a handkerchief, tucked under her mattress. She's been stealing from you, Mr. Holloway. Probably has been since the day she arrived." Grant looked at Mercy. Her face was white, but her eyes were steady. "Did you take it?" he asked. "No, sir." "She's lying," Mrs. Kellen spat. "It was in her room, in her possession. What more proof do you need?" "Why would I steal something so obvious?" Mercy's voice was quiet but firm. "If I were a thief, Mr. Holloway, I'd take money. Jewelry you wouldn't notice missing right away. Not a family heirloom that would be discovered immediately." "Unless you were planning to run," Mrs. Kellen countered. "Maybe you've been biding your time, waiting for the right moment to disappear with whatever you could carry." "I have nowhere to run to," Mercy said, "and nothing to run with. Everything I own fits in one bag. You know that, Mrs. Kellen. You've seen it yourself." Grant looked between them, his mind racing. Mrs. Kellen had served his family for 20 years. She'd been there when he was born, when Lila died, when he'd left his daughter in her care. She had no reason to lie. But Mercy. He thought about the last 4 days, the way she moved through the house, careful and quiet, taking up as little space as possible. The way she sang to Rosie with a voice that sounded like it had been broken and carefully put back together. The way she'd stood in the kitchen and told him the truth about his failures, even knowing it might cost her the only job she had. Nothing about her read as a thief. "When did you find it?" Grant asked Mrs. Kellen. "This morning. I was checking the upstairs rooms, making sure they were clean, and I happened to look under her mattress." "Why?" Grant interrupted. "Why would you look under her mattress?" Mrs. Kellen's mouth thinned. "I had my suspicions." "Based on what?" "Based on the fact that she appeared out of nowhere, with no references, no history, nothing but a sad story and a convenient talent for making herself indispensable. "Mrs. Kellen," Grant said carefully, "have you been going through Miss Hale's belongings regularly?" The housekeeper's face flushed. "I've been keeping an eye on her, yes, for the good of this household, for your daughter's safety." Grant turned to Mercy. "Have you ever been in my room, the master bedroom?" "No, sir, never. Mrs. Kellen told me that room was off limits." "That's true," Mrs. Kellen admitted reluctantly. "But she could have—" "How?" Grant cut her off. "If you've been watching her as closely as you say, when would she have had the opportunity? She's with Rosie all day, every day, and at night she sleeps in the nursery to be near the child. When exactly would she have snuck into my room, found the watch, and hidden it in a place where you just happened to look this morning?" Mrs. Kellen's flush deepened. She must have, or," Grant said slowly, "someone put it there to be found." The silence that fell over the kitchen was absolute. Mrs. Kellen drew herself up, her face going rigid. "Are you accusing me, Mr. Holloway?" "I'm asking questions that need answering. I have served this family faithfully for 20 years. I know. And I'm grateful. But that doesn't mean I'm going to let an innocent woman be accused of theft without evidence. The watch was in her room. Because someone put it there." Grant's voice hardened. "Someone who had access to both my room and Miss Hale's. Someone who's been looking for a reason to get rid of her since the day she arrived." Mrs. Kellen's hands shook with rage. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this." "No," Grant agreed. "You don't. But if you walk out that door, don't bother coming back." The housekeeper stared at him, shock replacing anger on her face. "You would choose her over me, the stranger?" "I'm choosing the truth," Grant said quietly. "And the truth is that Miss Hale has done nothing but care for my daughter with more patience and love than I had any right to expect, while you've apparently been scheming to get her thrown out of this house." "She's bewitched you," Mrs. Kellen hissed, "just like she's bewitched that child. Singing those unnatural songs, making herself seem like something she's not." "Enough!" Grant's voice cracked like a whip. "You're dismissed, Mrs. Kellen. Pack your things and be off the property by morning. I'll have your wages sent to wherever you land." The housekeeper's face went purple. She opened her mouth, closed it, then spun on her heel and stalked out of the kitchen. Her footsteps thundered up the stairs. Grant turned to Mercy. She stood frozen, still holding Rosie, her face drained of color. "I didn't take it," she said. "I swear." "I know." Grant crossed to her and took the watch from where Mrs. Kellen had dropped it on the table. He held it up, examining it in the light. His father's initials were engraved on the back, worn smooth by decades of handling. "This was in my parents' room. My room now. I haven't touched it since I came home. There's no way you could have taken it without Mrs. Kellen knowing, which means she's the only one who could have put it in your things." "Why?" Mercy's voice was barely a whisper. "Why would she do that?" "Because she's been running this household like it was hers for 2 years, Grant said. "And now I'm back, and you're here, and she's losing control. That's my guess, anyway." Rosie had stopped crying and was watching them both with wide, confused eyes. Grant looked down at his daughter and felt his heart squeeze. The child didn't understand what was happening. She just knew that the 2 adults who made up her world were upset, and that scared her. He knelt down so he was at Rosie's eye level. "Hey there, little one." Rosie buried her face in Mercy's skirt. "It's all right," Mercy said softly. She stroked the child's hair. "Everything's all right now." "Is it?" Grant looked up at Mercy. "I just fired the woman who's been running this house for 20 years. On your word against hers." "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." He stood. "She tried to destroy you to protect her own position. I won't have that in my house. Not ever." Mercy's throat worked. "What happens now?" "Now?" Grant looked around the kitchen, at the unwashed dishes, the cold stove, the disorder already creeping in. "Now we figure out how to run a household without a housekeeper, I suppose." "I can do it," Mercy said quickly. "I can cook and clean and manage the house. I've been doing most of it anyway these last 4 months." "That wasn't in your job description." "My job is to help." She met his eyes. That's all I've ever wanted to do, Mr. Holloway. Help. That's enough for me. Grant studied her face, the exhaustion, the determination, the careful way she held herself, as if expecting the world to knock her down again at any moment. He thought about the song she sang, the one that shouldn't exist. Thought about how Rosie slept in her arms and cried when anyone else tried to hold her. Thought about how she'd stood there and taken Mrs. Kellen's accusation without flinching, without running, without begging. All right, he said, we'll try it. But I'm paying you properly. Full wages for a housekeeper and a nanny combined. And if it's too much work, it won't be. If it is, Grant continued firmly, you tell me. We'll hire more help. I'm not going to work you to death, Miss Hale. Mercy, she said quietly. You can call me Mercy. Something in the way she said it made Grant's chest tighten. Not a request. Not quite. More like an offering. A small gift of informality in a household that had suddenly lost all its old rules. Mercy, he repeated. The name felt strange on his tongue. All right. And you can call me Grant when we're not in company. Her eyes widened slightly. That wouldn't be proper, sir. None of this is proper, Grant said, but it's what we've got, so we'll make it work. Mercy nodded slowly. Rosie, still clinging to her skirts, had calmed down and was now watching Grant with curious, cautious eyes. He met his daughter's gaze and tried to smile. It felt rusty, unpracticed. But Rosie didn't flinch, didn't look away, just watched him with those big brown eyes that looked so much like Lila's it made his throat close up. I should get supper started, Mercy said. It's getting late. I'll help, Grant said. You don't have to. I know, but I'm going to anyway. He rolled up his sleeves. I've been living on trail food and whatever I could buy in town for 2 years. It'll be good to cook something real for a change. They worked side by side in the kitchen as the light faded outside. Grant handled the heavy work, carrying water, stoking the stove, moving pots. Mercy did the rest, her movements efficient and practiced. Rosie sat at the table playing with a rag doll that looked homemade, occasionally looking up to make sure Mercy was still there. They didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The work had its own rhythm, and they fell into it like dancers who'd practiced the steps before, even though this was the first time they'd moved together in this particular way. When supper was ready, beans and cornbread and preserved tomatoes, they sat at the table together. Grant at one end, Mercy at the other, Rosie in between. The child ate messily, getting more food on her face than in her mouth, and Mercy cleaned her up patiently after every few bites. Grant watched them and felt something shifting in his chest, something painful and hopeful at the same time. This was his family now, not the one he'd planned for, not the one he dreamed about when Lila was alive and they decorated the nursery together, but the one he had, the one that was real. A man who'd run from his grief and his daughter, a woman who'd lost everything and found her way to a house that needed her, and a child who deserved better than both of them but was stuck with what she got. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close to good, but it was a start. After supper, Mercy took Rosie upstairs for bed. Grant cleaned up the kitchen, washing dishes by lamplight, listening to the sound of footsteps overhead and the distant murmur of Mercy's voice as she sang the child to sleep. When she came back down, he was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at nothing. She's asleep, Mercy said softly. Good. Grant didn't look up. Thank you. Mercy hesitated in the doorway. Mr. Holloway, Grant, I want you to know that I never intended to come between you and your daughter. If my being here makes things harder, it doesn't, Grant interrupted. If anything, you've made it possible for me to come back at all. If Rosie was still crying every night, still miserable, I don't know if I could have faced it, but seeing her peaceful, seeing her cared for. He finally looked up. You gave me a chance to be her father again. I owe you for that. Mercy's eyes shone in the lamplight. You don't owe me anything. I do, and I'm going to figure out how to repay it. Grant stood, suddenly too restless to sit. But first, I need to figure out how to be a father to a child who doesn't know me. Any suggestions? Mercy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Start small. Be there. Be consistent. Let her see you as part of the landscape before you try to be more. Children don't need grand gestures, Mr. Holloway. They need presence. They need to know you're not going to disappear. I'm not, Grant said. I'm never leaving again. Then show her that, every day, until she believes it. Grant nodded slowly. I can do that. Good. Mercy turned toward the stairs. I should get some sleep. Tomorrow I need to inventory the pantry and figure out what we need from town. I'll go with you, Grant said. To town, I mean. We can make a day of it. Take Rosie. Let her see more of the world than just this house. Mercy paused, one hand on the banister. Are you sure? People will talk. Let them. Grant's voice was firm. This is my house, my daughter, my employee. If people want to gossip, that's their problem, not ours. All right, Mercy smiled slightly, the first real smile Grant had seen from her. It transformed her face, made her look younger, less burdened. Tomorrow, then. She climbed the stairs, her footsteps light on the wood. Grant stood alone in the kitchen, holding his cold coffee, and listened to the house settling around him. Upstairs, his daughter slept peacefully. Beside her, a woman who'd lost everything watched over her with a mother's care. And somewhere in the darkness, the ghost of his dead wife either approved or didn't, but either way, Grant knew he'd made the right choice. He'd chosen truth. He'd chosen the person who'd stayed when staying was hard. He'd chosen mercy. And though he didn't know it yet, that choice would change everything. The morning came cool and clear, with mist still clinging to the low places when Grant stepped out onto the porch. He'd slept poorly, his mind churning through everything that had happened. Mrs. Kellen's departure before dawn, the weight of running a household he'd abandoned, the strange reality of sharing his home with a woman he barely knew but had chosen to trust. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the stiffness of too many years on the trail, and looked out over land that was his but hadn't felt like his in longer than he cared to remember. Behind him, the door opened. Mercy stepped out with Rosie on her hip, the child's face still soft with sleep. She'd dressed the little girl in a blue calico dress that was clean but faded, probably made over from something larger. Rosie's hair had been braided, though pieces were already escaping. "Morning," Grant said. "Good morning." Mercy's voice was quiet, careful. The events of yesterday still hung between them like smoke. "Are you still planning to go to town?" "If you're willing." "I need supplies. We're low on flour, sugar, salt. Mrs. Kellen usually kept better stock, but—" She trailed off, not finishing the thought. "Make a list," Grant said. "We'll get whatever you need." They hitched the wagon in silence, Grant handling the heavy work while Mercy kept Rosie occupied. The child watched everything with wide, curious eyes, occasionally babbling sounds that weren't quite words yet. When Mercy tried to set her down, Rosie clung tighter, and Grant saw the girl's lower lip tremble. "She's not used to mornings like this," Mercy explained. "Usually it's just the two of us, moving slow, singing while we work." "Does she need you to sing now?" Mercy glanced at him, then at Rosie. "Would you mind?" "It's your voice. Use it however you need." So Mercy sang softly while Grant finished with the horses, her melody floating through the cool morning air. It wasn't the lullaby. This was something different, a working song about morning glories and mockingbirds, and the way the sun climbs the sky. Rosie relaxed against her shoulder, listening, and Grant found himself listening too, his hands stilling on the leather traces. "You have other songs," he said when she finished. "A few. I make them up as I go." "Where'd you learn to do that?" Mercy was quiet for a moment. "My mother sang. Not like this. She couldn't hold a tune to save her life. But she loved music, loved the idea of it. She'd hum while she worked, make up silly rhymes to make me laugh. When she died, She stopped, adjusted Rosie on her hip. "I kept singing because it made me feel less alone. Eventually I got better at it." Grant wanted to ask more about her mother, her father shot for Mercy, the husband dead of fever. But Rosie chose that moment to reach for him, her small hands opening and closing. He froze. "She wants you to hold her," Mercy said. "She doesn't know me." "She's trying to. That's what this means." Mercy shifted closer. "Support her bottom, one arm behind her back. She's sturdy. You won't break her." Grant's hands felt too large, too rough, as he took his daughter from Mercy's arms. Rosie came to him easily, surprisingly light, surprisingly solid. She smelled like soap and milk, and something sweet he couldn't name. She looked up at him with Lila's eyes and touched his face with one small hand, her fingers sticky. "Dada?" she said. The word hit him like a fist to the chest. He couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. "She's been practicing that," Mercy said softly. "I didn't teach her. She just started saying it a few days ago, pointing at things, trying it out. I think she's been waiting to use it on someone." Grant's throat worked. "I don't deserve it." "Maybe not, but she's offering it anyway." Mercy climbed up into the wagon seat. "That's what children do. They offer love before they know better, before the world teaches them to be careful with it." Grant lifted Rosie up to Mercy, then climbed up himself and took the reins. The horses started forward, and they rolled down the long drive toward the main road. Rosie sat between them, occasionally bouncing with excitement, occasionally reaching for Grant's arm or Mercy's hand, testing the boundaries of this new arrangement. The ride to town took an hour. They talked in fits and starts, about the ranch, about what needed fixing, about how much stock they had, and what the market price for cattle might be. Mercy knew more about the household accounts than Grant would have expected, and when he said so, she just shrugged. "Mrs. Kellen used to complain about the numbers while she worked. I listened. After a while, I started asking questions, and she'd answer them because it made her feel important to explain. I learned a lot that way." "You're smart," Grant said. "I'm practical. There's a difference." "Is there?" Mercy looked at him sidelong. "Smart is knowing things. Practical is knowing how to use them. I'm not educated, Mr. Holloway. I can read and write and cipher, but that's all. Everything else I learned by watching and listening and trying not to starve." Grant heard the edge in her voice. Not bitterness exactly, but something close. "How old were you when your mother died?" 12. "My father raised me after that, until the war came, and he—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "He was a good man. Too good for the world he lived in." "What happened?" "Some Union soldiers got caught in a skirmish near our farm. My father pulled 3 of them into our barn, hid them, tended their wounds. A week later, Confederate soldiers came through looking for deserters. Someone told them my father was harboring the enemy. They didn't even ask for his side of the story, just shot him in front of our house and left him bleeding in the dirt." Grant's hands tightened on the reins. "How old were you?" 16. "Old enough to know I couldn't stay. The neighbors looked at me like I carried my father's treason, like Mercy was a disease I might spread." She touched Rosie's hair absently. "I married the first man who asked, Thomas Hale. He was older, not unkind. He needed a wife. I needed a name that wasn't stained. We made it work for 3 years before the fever took him. I'm sorry." "Don't be. I've had worse things to be sorry for." Mercy's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Thomas gave me his name and a roof. When he died, I sold what little we had and started looking for work. That's how I ended up at your door." They rode in silence for a while. Rosie hummed to herself, a fragment of one of Mercy's songs, and Grant felt something shifting in his understanding of the woman beside him. She wasn't just some desperate widow who'd stumbled into his household. She was a survivor who'd learned to trade one kind of currency, her labor, her voice, her care, for the only thing that mattered, a place to exist without judgment. The town appeared ahead, a cluster of buildings along the main road. Cedar Ridge wasn't much, a general store, a saloon, a church, a handful of houses, but it was the closest thing to civilization for 20 miles in any direction. As they rolled down the main street, heads turned. People stopped what they were doing to watch the wagon pass. Grant felt their eyes like needles. It had been 2 years since he'd shown his face here. 2 years since he'd stood at Lila's grave and then disappeared like smoke. They'd talked about him, he knew, speculated. Some probably thought he'd drunk himself to death in some distant town. Others might have assumed he'd started over somewhere else, abandoned his name along with his daughter. Now here he was, alive and sober, with a strange woman and his daughter sitting beside him in broad daylight. Let them look, he thought. Let them talk. He pulled the wagon up in front of Morrison's general store and set the brake. Mercy started to climb down, but Grant stopped her. "I'll go in first. Make the introductions. It'll be easier if I'm the one doing the talking. They're going to ask questions. I know, I'll answer the ones that matter and ignore the rest." Mercy nodded slowly. All right, but if it gets ugly, it won't. Grant hoped he was right. He walked into Morrison's with his shoulders squared and his hat in his hand. The store smelled like leather and tobacco and coffee beans. Charlie Morrison stood behind the counter, a heavy-set man with graying hair and sharp eyes. He looked up when the bell rang, and his face went through three expressions in quick succession: surprise, suspicion, and something that might have been relief. "Grant Holloway," Charlie said. "I'll be damned. Thought maybe you died." "Not yet." Grant approached the counter. "I'm back for good. Need to put in an order for supplies." "That's so?" Charlie's eyes flicked toward the window where the wagon sat. "Who's that with you?" "My daughter's nanny, Mercy Hale. She'll be coming in to give you the list." "What happened to Mrs. Kellen?" "She's no longer in my employ." Charlie's eyebrows went up. "That's sudden." "It was necessary." Grant's voice didn't invite further questions. "I need you to extend credit for household supplies until I can get my accounts sorted. I'll settle up within the month." "Your credit's good, Grant. Always has been." Charlie leaned against the counter. "But folks are going to talk. You know that, right? Coming back after all this time with a young woman nobody knows? Let them talk. I've got a household to run and a daughter to raise. What people say about it doesn't concern me." "It might concern her," Charlie said, nodding toward the window. "Young woman alone, working in a widower's house. Folks will make assumptions." "Then folks are idiots." Grant put his hat back on. "I'm going to bring her in now. Treat her with respect, Charlie. I mean that." Charlie raised his hands. "I'm not the problem, Grant, but there's others in this town who might be." Grant knew he was right. He also didn't care. He walked back out to the wagon, where Mercy sat with Rosie, waiting. The child was getting fussy, squirming in Mercy's lap. "She needs to move around," Mercy said. "She's been sitting too long. Bring her inside. Charlie's a decent man. He won't cause trouble." Mercy climbed down with Rosie, and Grant saw how people on the street stopped to stare. Two women in front of the dressmaker's shop whispered behind their hands. A man outside the saloon spat tobacco juice and watched them with narrowed eyes. Inside the store, Charlie came around the counter with a smile that looked only slightly forced. "Morning, ma'am. Welcome to Cedar Ridge." "Thank you." Mercy's voice was quiet, polite. She kept Rosie close. "That's Grant's little girl, isn't it?" "My lord, she's gotten big. Last time I saw her, she was barely a month old." "She's 2 now," Mercy said. "Growing fast?" "I bet." Charlie looked at Grant. "She looks like Lila. Got the same eyes." Grant's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "She does." They spent the next 20 minutes going through Mercy's list: flour, sugar, salt, coffee, dried beans, bacon, canned goods. Charlie pulled items from the shelves while Mercy checked them off, occasionally consulting with Grant about quantities. Rosie toddled around the store, fascinated by everything, and Mercy kept one eye on her while managing the practical work of household provisioning. "You know your business," Charlie observed. "Most young women your age wouldn't know half of what you're ordering." "I've been managing households since I was 16, Mercy said simply. "You learn fast when you have to." "I suppose you do." Charlie wrapped the last of their purchases in brown paper. "This should hold you for a while. If you need anything else, just send word." "Thank you, Mr. Morrison." "Charlie, everyone calls me Charlie." He glanced at Grant. "You take care of them, you hear? Both of them." "That's the plan." They loaded the supplies into the wagon, and Grant was just helping Mercy climb up when a voice called out behind them. "Grant Holloway." "As I live and breathe." Grant turned. Pastor William Hendricks stood on the church steps across the street, his black coat dusty from the road, his Bible tucked under one arm. He was 50-something, thin as a rail, with eyes that always looked like they were measuring you for either salvation or damnation. "Pastor," Grant said neutrally, "I heard you were back. Wasn't sure I believed it." Hendricks crossed the street, his gaze moving from Grant to Mercy to Rosie. "And this must be your daughter. She's beautiful, Grant. Lila would be proud." "Thank you." "And this is—" Hendricks' eyes lingered on Mercy. "Miss Mercy Hale. She's caring for my daughter and managing my household." "I see." Hendricks' expression didn't change, but something in his tone sharpened. "That's quite a responsibility for a young woman. You must be very capable, Miss Hale." "I do my best, Pastor." "I'm sure you do." Hendricks looked back at Grant. I hope you'll be bringing your family to services this Sunday. We've missed you these past 2 years. Grant felt Mercy stiffen beside him. The word family hung in the air like a challenge. We'll see. The Lord's house is always open, Hendricks said, especially to those who've lost their way. I haven't lost my way, Pastor. I just took a long detour. Sometimes detours become the path if we're not careful. Hendricks' smile didn't reach his eyes. I'll pray for you, Grant. For all of you. He walked away, his black coat flapping in the breeze. Grant watched him go, his stomach tight. He doesn't approve, Mercy said quietly. He doesn't have to. This is my life, not his. He's a pastor. People listen to him. Let them. Grant climbed into the wagon and took up the reins. We've got enough to worry about without adding the pastor's opinion to the list. They rode out of town in silence. Rosie had fallen asleep against Mercy's side, worn out by all the new sights and sounds. The sun was high now, burning off the last of the morning cool, and the road stretched ahead of them, dusty and familiar. They're going to make it hard for you, Mercy said after a while. The pastor, the townspeople. They'll talk. They'll judge. Some of them might even try to make trouble. I know. You could hire someone older, someone beyond reproach. That would stop most of the talk. Grant looked at her. Do you want to leave? I'm asking if you want me to. That's not an answer. Mercy was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on Rosie's sleeping back. No, she said finally. I don't want to leave. I know that's selfish. I know it makes things harder for you, but this is the first place I've felt needed, wanted, not just for what I can do, but for who I am. I'm not ready to give that up. Then don't, Grant said. I made my choice yesterday when I defended you against Mrs. Kellen. I'm not backing down now just because a few small-minded people want to gossip. It might be more than gossip. Then we'll deal with more than gossip. Grant's voice was firm. You saved my daughter when I couldn't. You gave her peace when everyone else had given up. That's worth more than 1,000 spotless reputations. Mercy's eyes shone, but she didn't cry. Just nodded once and turned her face toward the horizon. They made it home by mid-afternoon. Grant unloaded the supplies while Mercy put Rosie down for a proper nap. When she came back downstairs, he was in the kitchen, sorting through the goods they'd bought. I'll make dinner, Mercy said. Let me help. You don't have to. I know, but I want to. Grant met her eyes. I want to be part of this household, Mercy, not just the man who owns it. Can you let me do that? She studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, but you're taking orders from me in the kitchen. This is my territory. Yes, ma'am. They worked together through the afternoon, preparing food, organizing the pantry, planning meals for the week ahead. Grant found himself watching Mercy more than he should, the way her hands moved, quick and certain, the way she hummed under her breath while she worked, the way she paused sometimes and looked toward the ceiling, listening for Rosie even though the child was sleeping soundly. You care about her, he said. Mercy looked up from the dough she was kneading. Of course I do. She's a good child. It's more than that. Mercy's hand stilled. What do you want me to say, Grant? That I love her? I do. I know I have no right to. I know she's not mine. But when you spend every day caring for someone, singing them to sleep, wiping their tears, watching them grow, love happens whether you plan for it or not. I'm not angry. You should be. I'm the help. I shouldn't have. You should have, Grant interrupted. Someone needed to love her. I wasn't here to do it. If you hadn't. He stopped, swallowed hard. If you hadn't, she'd be growing up cold and alone and afraid. Instead, she's happy. She sings. She sleeps. That's because of you. She's your daughter. And you're the one who made sure she knew what love felt like while I was busy drowning in my own grief. Grant's voice was rough. Don't apologize for that. Don't ever apologize for that. Mercy turned back to her dough, kneading harder than necessary. I've never had anyone of my own to care for. My mother died when I was young. My father after that. Thomas was a good man, but he didn't need me the way Rosie does. When I came here and saw this child who couldn't sleep, who cried all night, who just needed someone to see her, her voice cracked. I saw myself, the little girl I'd been, alone, scared, wanting someone to stay. Grant moved around the table and stood beside her. You stayed. I had nowhere else to go. That doesn't make it less important. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. Thank you. For staying, for singing, for being what she needed when I couldn't be. Mercy's shoulders shook once, hard, and then she steadied herself. You're welcome. They stood there for a moment, the afternoon light slanting through the kitchen window, dust motes floating in the golden air. Then Rosie's cry came from upstairs. Not distressed, just awake and ready for attention, and Mercy stepped away, wiping her hands on her apron. I'll get her. Let me, Grant said. Please. I need to start somewhere. Mercy nodded and watched him go. Grant climbed the stairs, his heart pounding harder than it should. He opened the nursery door and found Rosie standing in her bed, gripping the rail, her hair wild from sleep. Dada? She said, uncertain. Yeah, Grant said softly. It's Dada. You want to come down? Rosie held out her arms. Grant crossed the room and picked her up, and this time it felt a little less terrifying, a little more right. She was warm and solid and real. His daughter. His responsibility. His second chance. Mercy's downstairs, he said. Let's go find her. Rosie nodded against his shoulder and stuck her thumb in her mouth. Grant carried her down to the kitchen, where Mercy had gone back to her work, and set the child in a chair with some wooden spoons to play with. They finished preparing dinner together, and when it was ready, they sat at the table, the three of them, and ate like a family. It wasn't perfect. Rosie was messy, the food was simple. They didn't have much to say, but it was real. And for the first time in 2 years, Grant felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. After dinner, while Mercy cleaned up, Grant took Rosie outside to watch the sunset. The child was fascinated by everything, the chickens scratching in the yard, the horses in the corral, the way the light turned the clouds pink and orange. She pointed at things and made sounds, and Grant tried to teach her words. Horse, he said, pointing. Hoss, Rosie repeated. Close enough. They sat on the porch steps together, and Rosie leaned against him, trusting in a way that made his chest ache. He thought about Lila, about how she'd imagined these moments, father and daughter watching the sky together. She'd painted pictures with her words during her pregnancy, describing the life they'd have once the baby came. She'd never gotten to live those pictures, never held Rosie outside of a delivery room soaked with her own blood. But Grant was here now, and Rosie was here, and they were alive, both of them, together. Maybe that was enough. Mercy came out with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Getting cold. You should bring her in soon. 5 more minutes. But Mercy sat beside them on the steps, and the three of them watched the sun sink below the horizon. Somewhere out in the darkness, a coyote called. The horses answered with nervous whinnies. Rosie yawned hugely and rubbed her eyes. Bath and bed, Mercy said. Come on, little one. They went inside together, and Grant found himself following them upstairs, watching as Mercy prepared the bath, tested the water temperature, undressed Rosie with practiced efficiency. The child splashed and played, getting more water on the floor than on herself, and Mercy laughed, a sound Grant hadn't heard from her before. You're a little fish, Mercy told Rosie. That's what you are. A little fish who's going to turn into a prune if we don't get you out. After the bath, Mercy dressed Rosie in a clean nightgown and sat in the rocking chair. Grant stood in the doorway, uncertain whether he should stay or go. Mercy looked up at him. You can stay, if you want. Grant entered quietly and sat on the floor with his back against the wall. Mercy began to sing, not the lullaby tonight, but something else. A song about stars and dreams and children who are brave enough to sleep in the dark. Her voice was soft and clear, and Rosie's eyes grew heavy, then closed. When the child was fully asleep, Mercy carefully stood and carried her to the bed, tucking the quilts around her. She stood there for a moment, looking down at Rosie's peaceful face, and then turned to find Grant watching her. What? She whispered. Nothing, he whispered back. Just, thank you. Again. They left the room together, closing the door softly. In the hallway, they stood awkwardly for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. "I should let you get some rest," Grant said finally. "I sleep in there," Mercy said, gesturing to the nursery. "On a cot, in case she wakes." "You don't have to do that anymore. I'm here now, I can—" "She's used to me being there. If she wakes and I'm gone, she'll be frightened." Grant nodded slowly. "Then I'll be nearby. If you need anything. If she needs anything." "Thank you." They stood there a moment longer, and Grant felt something building between them. Not attraction exactly, though there was that too, if he was honest. More like recognition. Two people who'd been broken by different kinds of grief, learning to exist in the same space without causing each other more harm. "Good night, Mercy." "Good night, Grant." He went to his room, the master bedroom he hadn't entered since coming home, and stood outside the door for a long time before he could make himself turn the knob. Inside, everything was exactly as he'd left it. The bed he'd shared with Lila, the dresser where she'd kept her things, the window where she'd stood watching the sunrise during her last pregnancy. Grant lit a lamp and looked around. Someone, Mrs. Kellen probably, had kept the room clean. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no sign of neglect, just emptiness, the kind that came from a space waiting for someone who would never return. He sat on the edge of the bed and put his head in his hands. "I'm trying, Lila," he whispered. "I know I failed you, failed her, but I'm trying now. I hope that counts for something." The room didn't answer. The dead never did. But downstairs the house creaked and settled. In the nursery, his daughter slept peacefully. And somewhere between those two truths, Grant found a small measure of peace that felt almost like forgiveness. He lay down on the bed, his house, his life, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The town would talk. The pastor would judge. People would make assumptions and spread rumors and try to tear down what he was trying to build. But tonight, his daughter was safe. His household was provided for. And for the first time in 2 years, Grant Holloway was home. That would have to be enough. The peace lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, Grant woke to the sound of hammering rain against the windows and thunder rolling across the hills like artillery fire. He dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Mercy already in the kitchen, Rosie clinging to her skirts and whimpering with each crash of thunder. "Storm came up fast," Mercy said. She was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she poured coffee. "The creek will flood if this keeps up." Grant looked out the window at sheets of rain turning the yard to mud. "How high does it usually get?" "I don't know, Mrs. Kellen never said, but the old barn sits right on the bank, and if the water rises—" Another crack of thunder drowned out her words. Rosie burst into tears, and Mercy immediately scooped her up, murmuring comfort against the child's hair. "I need to check the stock," Grant said. "Make sure the horses are secured and the chickens aren't drowning in their coop. Be careful. The ground will be treacherous." Grant pulled on his oilskin coat and hat and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit him like a physical force, cold and relentless. He could barely see 10 feet in front of him. He made his way to the barn, checking on the horses first. They were nervous but safe. The chickens had retreated to their roosts, huddled together for warmth. Everything that could be secured was secured. He was on his way back to the house when he heard it, a child's scream, high and terrified, cutting through the storm. Grant's blood turned to ice. He spun toward the sound and saw a small figure in a blue dress running toward the creek, toward the rising water that was already spilling over its banks. Rosie. He didn't think, just ran. His boots slipped in the mud, but he kept moving, his eyes locked on that tiny figure getting smaller as she ran away from him. He tried to shout her name, but the wind ripped his voice away. Rosie reached the creek bank and didn't stop. She went right over the edge, disappearing into the surging water. Grant's heart stopped. He reached the bank seconds later and saw her small body being swept downstream, her arms flailing, her mouth open in a scream he couldn't hear over the roar of the flood. 20 yards ahead, the old barn loomed, half collapsed already, its timbers groaning as the water battered against it. He went in after her. The water was shockingly cold, moving faster than he'd expected. It grabbed him and tried to drag him under, but he fought against it, swimming hard toward where he'd seen Rosie go down. The current slammed him against a submerged log, and pain exploded in his ribs, but he pushed past it and kept swimming. There, a flash of blue fabric caught on a branch near the barn. Grant surged toward it, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming. He got one hand on the fabric and pulled. Rosie came up coughing and crying, her face blue with cold. Grant wrapped one arm around her and started fighting his way back toward the bank. But the current was too strong, and they were being swept toward the barn, toward the collapsing structure that would crush them both if they got caught underneath. Then another splash, and suddenly Mercy was there. She'd waded in from the shallow side, water up to her waist, and she was moving toward them with desperate determination. Her gray dress was plastered to her body, her hair streaming behind her, her face set in an expression of absolute focus. "Give her to me!" she shouted over the roar of the water. Grant didn't argue. He pushed Rosie toward Mercy, who caught the child and immediately turned back toward the bank. But the current had other ideas. It surged suddenly, a wave of brown water and debris, and Mercy lost her footing. She went under, still clutching Rosie. Grant lunged after them. His hand closed around Mercy's arm, and he hauled with everything he had. They came up together, all three of them tangled in each other, and Grant got his feet under him on a submerged rock. He braced himself and started pulling them toward safety, inch by agonizing inch. Behind them, the barn gave a terrible groan and collapsed into the water with a crash that shook the ground. Grant didn't look back. He just kept moving, kept fighting, until finally his feet found purchase on the muddy bank, and he was able to drag Mercy and Rosie up onto solid ground. They collapsed in a heap, all three of them coughing and shaking and gasping for air. Rosie was screaming, not hurt, just terrified. And Mercy was bleeding from somewhere, red mixing with the brown water streaming off her clothes. Grant gathered them both close, shielding them from the rain with his body, and half carried, half dragged them back toward the house. They stumbled through the kitchen door, and Grant kicked it shut behind them. The sudden absence of wind and rain was disorienting. They stood there dripping on the floor, all three of them shaking so hard they could barely stand. "Fire!" Grant said through chattering teeth. "We need fire." He settled Mercy and Rosie by the stove and began building up the fire with hands that didn't want to work properly. When he got it blazing, he turned back to find Mercy trying to peel Rosie's wet clothes off while the child sobbed and clung to her. "Let me help," Grant said. Together they stripped Rosie down and wrapped her in a blanket from the parlor. Mercy held her close, rocking her, murmuring soft words while the child's sobs gradually subsided into hiccuping breaths. Grant went upstairs and came back with dry clothes for all of them and an armful of quilts. "You're bleeding," he said to Mercy. She looked down at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. Both palms were torn open, deep cuts from where she'd grabbed at rocks and branches trying to keep her footing. Blood dripped onto the floor. "I didn't feel it," she said distantly. "I just had to get to her, had to get her out." "Let me see." Grant pulled up a chair and sat facing her. He took one of her hands in his, carefully, gently, and examined the damage. The cuts were deep but clean. They'd need wrapping, but they'd heal. "Hold still." He got clean cloths and warm water and began washing the cuts. Mercy didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, just sat there holding Rosie with one arm while Grant tended to her hands. The child had stopped crying and was now just breathing in little shudders, her face pressed against Mercy's shoulder. "How did she get out?" Grant asked quietly. "I don't know. She was right beside me in the kitchen, and then thunder crashed, and when I turned around she was gone. The door was open. She must have been running from the noise, and Mercy's voice broke. "I should have been watching her more carefully." "Don't." Grant wrapped a clean cloth around her left hand. "Don't blame yourself. She's fast, and she was scared. This isn't your fault. I'm supposed to keep her safe. And you did. You went into that water after her. You could have drowned." "So could you." Mercy's eyes met his. "But you went in first." "She's my daughter." "And what am I?" The question came out raw, unguarded. "What am I to her, Grant? I'm not her mother. I'm not her family. I'm just the woman you pay to keep her alive. But when I saw her in that water, I didn't think about that. I didn't think about anything except getting to her, keeping her safe, bringing her home." Grant finished wrapping her other hand and sat back. "You're more than hired help, Mercy. You have to know that by now." "Do I? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm still just the maid who sings pretty songs and takes orders. You're the woman who saved my daughter's life today. Twice. Once by going into that water, and once before that by being the person she trusts enough to survive this world. Grant's voice was rough. That makes you family, whether we've got the words for it or not. Mercy's eyes shone with tears she wouldn't let fall. Rosie stirred between them, whimpering, and Mercy immediately turned her attention back to the child, checking her over, feeling her forehead, making sure she was warm enough. She needs rest, Mercy said. We all do. Grant nodded and stood. I'll heat more water. We'll all need proper baths to ward off the chill. They spent the rest of the day huddled by the fire. The storm raged outside, but inside they were warm and dry and safe. Mercy sang to Rosie until the child fell asleep, exhausted by terror and cold. Then she sat in silence, staring into the flames, her bandaged hands resting in her lap. Tell me about the officer, Grant said after a while. Mercy's head came up. What? The Union officer, the one who gave the order to shoot your father. You said you trusted him once. Tell me about that. Mercy was quiet for so long Grant thought she wouldn't answer. Then she said, His name was Captain James Whitmore. He came through our county early in the war, requisitioning supplies. He was different from the others, polite, respectful. He talked to my father about farming, about the land, about everything except the war. I was 17, and I thought... She stopped, her jaw tightening. I thought he saw us as people, not just resources to be used or obstacles to be removed. What happened? My father helped those wounded soldiers. Word got back to Whitmore somehow. He rode out with a squad of men, and I thought, God help me, I thought he was coming to thank my father for showing mercy. Instead, he dismounted, pulled his pistol, and shot my father in the chest without saying a word. Then he looked at me standing there in the doorway, and he said, You should have taught him better. Like it was my fault, like mercy was a lesson I'd failed to learn. Grant felt rage building in his chest, hot and fierce. Did you ever see him again? No. I heard later he'd been promoted. Probably got commended for removing a Confederate sympathizer. Her voice was bitter. That's when I learned that trust is just another word for weakness. The world doesn't reward mercy, Grant. It punishes it. You showed mercy today, to Rosie. You could have stayed on the bank, let me handle it, but you went in anyway. That's different. How? Because she's a child. She deserves protection, even if adults don't. Grant moved closer and sat beside her on the floor. You deserve protection too, Mercy. You deserve a place where you don't have to earn your right to exist every single day. I wouldn't know what to do with that, Mercy said. I've been surviving so long, I've forgotten how to do anything else. Then learn, here, with us. Grant hesitated, then added, with me. Mercy looked at him, really looked at him, and something passed between them. Not love, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the acknowledgement that they were both broken people trying to build something whole out of the pieces they had left. I don't know how, she whispered. Neither do I. But we can figure it out together. They sat in silence while the fire crackled and the storm howled outside. Rosie slept on, oblivious to the tentative connection forming between the two adults who'd both nearly died to save her. And for the first time since Lila's death, Grant felt something that might have been hope starting to take root in his chest. The storm finally broke near midnight. Grant woke from a doze to find the house quiet and Mercy gone from her spot by the fire. He found her upstairs in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair with Rosie in her arms, singing so softly he could barely hear. Can't sleep? He asked from the doorway. Every time I close my eyes, I see her going under the water. Mercy's voice was steady, but her hands trembled where they held the child. I keep thinking about what could have happened. What would have happened if you hadn't been there, if I hadn't gotten to her in time. But you did. We both did. She's safe. This time. Mercy looked down at Rosie's peaceful face. But what about next time? What about all the dangers I can't see coming, can't prevent, can't save her from? Grant entered the room and knelt beside the chair. You can't protect her from everything. No one can. All we can do is be there when she needs us and teach her how to survive in a world that doesn't make it easy. Like your father taught you? My father taught me how to run a ranch, how to read men, and how to keep my word once it's given. The rest I learned the hard way. Grant touched Rosie's hair gently. I want better for her. I want her to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she matters, knowing that someone will always be there to pull her out of the flood. Even if that someone isn't you? The question wasn't cruel, just honest. Grant met Mercy's eyes. I hope it will be me. But if it's you, I'll count that as the next best thing, because you love her. I see it every time you look at her, every time you sing. You love her like she's yours, and that's a gift I can never repay. I don't want repayment. I know, that's what makes it a gift. They sat together in the dimness, the three of them, while the house settled and the night deepened. Eventually, Mercy dozed off in the chair, and Grant carefully took Rosie from her arms and put the child to bed. Then he fetched a blanket and draped it over Mercy's shoulders. She stirred but didn't wake. He should leave, should go to his own room, his own bed. But something kept him there, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, watching over both of them, watching over his makeshift family. When dawn came, gray and cool, Grant was still there. The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and repair. The barn was a total loss, crushed under the weight of its own collapse and the flood debris. The creek had carved new channels through the property, and several fences would need rebuilding. But the house stood solid, and more importantly, Rosie seemed to have suffered no lasting trauma from her near drowning. She was more clingy than usual, wanting to be carried everywhere. But Mercy's songs and Grant's steady presence gradually eased her back to normal. By the end of the week, she was toddling around the house again, investigating everything with her characteristic fearless curiosity. Grant was in the kitchen planning the barn rebuild when he heard a horse approaching. He looked out the window and saw Pastor Hendricks dismounting, his black coat dusty from the ride. "Company," Grant called to Mercy, who was upstairs with Rosie. He opened the door before the pastor could knock. "Pastor Hendricks, what brings you out this way?" "I heard about the storm. Wanted to make sure you were all right." Hendricks' eyes moved past Grant, searching. "All of you?" "We're fine. Barn's gone, but we're safe." "I'm glad to hear it. May I come in?" Grant stepped aside reluctantly. Hendricks entered and removed his hat, looking around with the assessing gaze of a man used to judging the spiritual state of a household by its physical condition. "Coffee?" Grant offered. "Please." They sat at the kitchen table, and Grant poured 2 cups. Hendricks took his black, sipped once, and set it down carefully. "I'll be direct with you, Grant. There's talk in town. There's always talk. This kind of talk can be damaging. To you, to your household, to that young woman upstairs." Hendricks leaned forward. "People are saying she's too young, too pretty, too comfortable in your home. They're saying it's unseemly for a widower and an unmarried woman to be living under the same roof without a chaperone. Mrs. Kellen was here for the first 4 months. Mrs. Kellen has been in town for the last week, telling anyone who'll listen that she was driven out by jealousy and scheming. She's claiming that Miss Hale wormed her way into your affections and turned you against your most loyal servant." Grant's jaw tightened. "Mrs. Kellen tried to frame Mercy for theft. I caught her in the lie and dismissed her. That's the truth. That's your version. Mrs. Kellen tells a different story, and she's been with your family for 20 years. Who do you think people are more inclined to believe?" "I don't care what people believe." "You should." Hendricks' voice was stern. "You have a daughter to think about. How will it look for her growing up in a house where her father's morality is constantly questioned? The stigma will follow her, Grant. Children are cruel. They'll make Rosie pay for your choices." "What exactly are you suggesting, Pastor?" "Send Miss Hale away. Hire an older woman, someone beyond reproach. Mrs. Patterson's daughter recently lost her husband. She'd be perfect. Or I can ask around in other counties, find someone suitable." "No." Hendricks blinked. "No?" "Mercy stays. She's good with Rosie. She runs the household efficiently, and she's earned her place here. I'm not throwing her out to satisfy gossips." "Then marry her." The words fell into the room like stones into still water. Grant stared at the pastor, certain he'd misheard. "What?" "Marry her," Hendricks repeated. "If she's as indispensable as you claim, make it official. Give her your name, make her your wife, and the talk stops. Your daughter gets a mother, Miss Hale gets security, and your reputation remains intact. Everyone benefits." "That's..." Grant couldn't find words. That's insane. It's practical. Marriage doesn't require love, Grant. It requires commitment and shared purpose. You both have that already. The ceremony would simply formalize what already exists. And if I refuse? Hendricks' expression hardened. Then I can't stop what's coming. There are men in town who believe you're living in sin, men who think your daughter should be removed from this household and placed somewhere more appropriate. They've already been talking to the county magistrate about filing for an inquiry into her welfare. Cold fear sliced through Grant's gut. They can't take Rosie. They can try. And with Mrs. Kellen's testimony, they might succeed. A judge would look at a house with no proper supervision, with a young unmarried woman serving as nursemaid, and might very well decide that the child would be better served elsewhere. This is blackmail. This is reality. Hendricks stood. I don't like it any more than you do, Grant, but I'm trying to help you see the situation clearly. You have 3 choices. Send Miss Hale away, marry her, or risk losing your daughter. Those are the options. Choose wisely. He put his hat back on and walked to the door. Before he left, he turned back. I'll give you a week to decide. After that, I can't hold back the tide. The door closed behind him, and Grant sat alone in the kitchen, his coffee growing cold, his mind racing. Footsteps on the stairs. Mercy appeared, Rosie on her hip, her expression carefully neutral. I heard, she said quietly. How much? Enough. She set Rosie down, and the child immediately toddled over to play with a wooden spoon. He's right, you know, about the town, about what they'll do. I won't let them take her. Then you need to make a choice. And before you ask, I'll make mine now. I'll leave. Tonight if you want. I won't be the reason they come for Rosie. No. Grant stood. You're not leaving. We'll find another way. There isn't another way. You heard him. Mercy's voice was steady, but pain flickered in her eyes. I knew this would happen eventually. I just hoped we'd have more time. Grant crossed to her and took her bandaged hands carefully in his. What if there was a third option? There isn't. What if we did what he suggested? What if we got married? Mercy's eyes widened. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Think about it. The talk stops, you get security. Rosie keeps the only mother she's ever known. It makes sense. It's insane, Mercy said, echoing his earlier words. You don't love me. No, but I trust you. I respect you. That's more than most people start with. Grant tightened his grip slightly. I'm not offering romance, Mercy. I'm offering partnership. A business arrangement that protects all 3 of us. A business arrangement, Mercy repeated flatly. Yes. You'd have my name, access to my accounts, full authority over the household. In return, you continue doing what you're already doing, caring for Rosie, managing the house. Nothing would have to change except the paperwork. Everything would change. You'd be tied to me. You could never... She stopped, looked away. You could never find someone you actually love. I already love someone, Grant said quietly. And I lost her. I'm not looking to replace Lila, Mercy. I'm just trying to build something workable out of what's left. Aren't you? Mercy's throat worked. She looked down at their joined hands, at the bandages covering her wounds from saving his daughter. I need to think. Take all the time you need. But Pastor Hendricks gave us a week, and we need to decide before then. She nodded once and pulled her hands free. I'll think about it. She picked up Rosie and carried her upstairs, leaving Grant alone with his wild, desperate proposal hanging in the air between them. 3 days passed in careful silence. Mercy moved through the house like a ghost, doing her work with mechanical precision while avoiding Grant's eyes. Rosie sensed the tension and became fretful, clinging to Mercy's skirts and whimpering when the woman tried to set her down. Grant threw himself into physical labor, repairing fences, clearing storm debris, anything that kept his hands busy and his mind from circling endlessly around the impossible choice he'd laid at Mercy's feet. On the 4th morning, he woke to find an envelope slid under his bedroom door. Inside was a single piece of paper, the handwriting careful and precise. I need to know about her first. About Lila. I can't marry a ghost I don't understand. If you can tell me about her, really tell me, not just the pretty parts, then I'll give you my answer. Meet me in the orchard after Rosie's asleep tonight. Grant read it 3 times, his chest tight. She wasn't saying no. She was asking for truth. And God help him, he owed her that much. The day crawled by. Grant worked outside, hyper-aware of every movement in the house, every glimpse of Mercy through the windows. At supper they sat together as usual, but the silence was different now, charged with anticipation and dread in equal measure. Rosie babbled and played with her food, oblivious to the adult tension swirling around her. When the sun finally set and Mercy took Rosie upstairs for bed, Grant went to the orchard and waited. The apple trees were old, gnarled things his grandfather had planted, and they formed a small cathedral of twisted branches and dappled moonlight. He sat on a stump and tried to organize his thoughts, tried to figure out how to explain Lila to someone who'd never known her. Mercy appeared 20 minutes later, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. She didn't sit, just stood a few feet away, her arms crossed. "Tell me," she said. Grant looked up at the stars, searching for words. Lila was fire. Everything about her burned bright, her laugh, her temper, her passion for life. She didn't do anything halfway. When she loved something, she consumed it completely. When she hated something, she destroyed it without mercy. Did she love you? Yes. God, yes. Too much, maybe. She gave me everything she had, every piece of herself, and His voice cracked. I couldn't save her when it mattered, couldn't stop her from bleeding out after Rosie was born, couldn't do a damn thing except watch her die. Mercy was quiet for a long moment. What did she look like? Dark hair, darker eyes, skin that tanned in the summer sun, strong hands from working alongside me on the ranch. She was beautiful, but not in a delicate way. More like a storm is beautiful, dangerous and alive and impossible to look away from. Do I look like her? No. Grant met her eyes. You're nothing like her. Lila was all edges and intensity. He searched for the right word. Your quiet strength. The kind that bends but doesn't break. Lila would have fought the flood head-on and probably drowned in the attempt. You went around it, found the weakness, and pulled us all to safety. Is that better or worse? It's different, not better, not worse, just different. Mercy sat down on the ground, wrapping her skirt around her legs. Tell me about the day she died. Grant's hands curled into fists. I can't. You have to. If we do this, if I marry you, I need to know what I'm walking into. I need to understand the ghost that's going to live in that house with us. He wanted to refuse, wanted to keep that day locked away where it couldn't hurt him anymore. But Mercy was right. She deserved to know. The labor started at dawn, he said finally, his voice rough. Too early. The midwife said everything was fine, but I could see Lila was scared. She tried to hide it, tried to be brave, but I knew her too well. The contractions got worse and the bleeding started. Not much at first, just a little. The midwife said it was normal, but it kept getting worse. He stopped, his throat closing up. Mercy waited, silent and patient. By the time Rosie was born, there was so much blood. It was everywhere, on the sheets, on Lila's dress, on my hands when I tried to help. The midwife was panicking, trying to stop the bleeding, but nothing worked. And Lila just kept getting paler, weaker. The baby was crying and Lila reached for her, held her for maybe 2 minutes, and then he couldn't finish. Then she died, Mercy said softly. She looked at me and said, "Take care of our girl." Those were her last words. Not "I love you," not "I'm scared," just "take care of our girl." And then she closed her eyes and she was gone, and I was standing there holding a screaming newborn covered in her mother's blood, and His voice broke completely. I couldn't do it. Couldn't even look at Rosie without seeing Lila dying. So I ran, left that baby with Mrs. Kellen, and ran like the coward I am. Mercy moved closer and sat beside him on the stump. She didn't touch him, didn't try to comfort him, just sat there, solid and present, while he fell apart. I failed her, Grant whispered. Failed both of them. Lila asked me to take care of Rosie, and I abandoned her for 2 years. What kind of man does that? A broken one, Mercy said. A man who lost everything and didn't know how to carry what was left. That's not an excuse. No, but it's a reason. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I'll marry you. Grant's head snapped up. What? I'll marry you, not because Pastor Hendricks is forcing us, not to save your reputation or secure my position. I'll marry you because Rosie deserves parents who will stay, who will fight for her, who won't run when things get hard. She met his eyes. You ran once. I believe you won't run again. That's enough for me to build on. Mercy, you don't have to, I know I don't have to. I'm choosing to, just like you chose to defend me against Mrs. Kellen, just like you went into the flood after Rosie. We keep choosing each other, Grant. Maybe it's time we made it official. Grant stared at her, this woman who'd appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to pray. I can't promise I'll ever love you the way I loved Lila. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to be honest with me, to partner with me in raising your daughter, and to let me build a life that's mine instead of borrowed. Can you do that? Yes. Then we have a deal. Mercy stood and brushed off her skirt. We should tell Pastor Hendricks in the morning. The sooner we do this, the sooner the town stops circling like vultures. Wait. Grant stood too. There's something else you need to know. About Rosie's inheritance, about the ranch. If something happens to me, everything goes to her. You'd be her guardian, but you wouldn't own anything. I need you to understand that before we— I don't care about the ranch, Mercy interrupted. I don't care about money or property or any of it. I care about that little girl upstairs who sings my songs in her sleep. That's what I'm marrying into. Everything else is just details. Grant felt something shift in his chest, gratitude maybe, or relief, or something bigger than both. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We haven't survived the wedding. They walked back to the house together, not touching but moving in rhythm, like two people learning to dance. Inside, the lamps were lit, casting warm pools of light across the kitchen floor. Everything looked ordinary, domestic, safe. But Grant knew that by morning, everything would be different. Mercy paused at the bottom of the stairs. I should check on Rosie. Mercy? She turned back. I'll try, Grant said. I can't promise I'll be good at this, but I'll try. That's all I'm asking. She climbed the stairs and disappeared into the nursery. Grant stood alone in the kitchen and wondered if Lila was watching from wherever the dead go. Wondered if she approved or raged or simply didn't care anymore. He'd never know. The dead kept their own counsel, but the living had to keep moving forward, one impossible choice at a time. The next morning, Grant hitched the wagon and drove into town alone. Mercy had wanted to come, but he'd insisted on handling Pastor Hendricks himself. This was his choice, his responsibility, and he wouldn't hide behind her to make it easier. He found the pastor in his small office behind the church, bent over a sermon he was writing. Hendricks looked up when Grant knocked, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. Grant, I didn't expect to see you so soon. I've made my decision. Grant removed his hat. I'm going to marry Miss Hale, as soon as possible. Hendricks set down his pen carefully. I see. And Miss Hale is agreeable to this arrangement? She is? You understand what you're committing to? Marriage is a sacred covenant, Grant. It's not something to be entered into lightly, even under difficult circumstances. I understand. Do you? Hendricks leaned back in his chair. Because from where I sit, this looks like two desperate people making a desperate choice. That's not the foundation for a godly union. Grant's jaw tightened. You're the one who suggested it. You said marry her or lose Rosie. Well, I'm choosing marriage. Isn't that what you wanted? I wanted you to consider your options. I wanted you to understand the gravity of the situation. But I also want you to enter this union with the right intentions. If you're only doing this to silence gossip, I'm doing this to protect my daughter, Grant cut him off, and to give Mercy the security she deserves. Maybe that's not romantic, but it's honest. And it's a hell of a lot more than most marriages start with. Hendricks was quiet for a long moment, studying Grant's face. Finally, he nodded. All right, I'll perform the ceremony. When do you want to do this? This week, as soon as you can arrange it. That's very fast. That's the point. The faster we do this, the faster the town has to accept it. You'll need witnesses, 2, at minimum. I'll find them. Hendricks pulled out a ledger and made a notation. Saturday afternoon then, 2 o'clock, here at the church. No. Grant shook his head. Not at the church. At my house. This is a practical arrangement, Pastor, not a celebration. I don't want a crowd or a spectacle, just you, me, Mercy, and whoever we can get to witness. That's highly irregular. I don't care. Those are my terms. Hendricks sighed. Very well. Saturday at 2 o'clock at your ranch. I'll bring 2 members of the congregation to serve as witnesses. But Grant, I'm warning you, this won't stop all the talk. Some people will see it as confirmation of their suspicions. They'll say you were living in sin all along, and that's why you're rushing into marriage. Let them say whatever they want. At least they can't take Rosie. No, Hendricks agreed quietly. They can't, though I pray you're not making a mistake you'll regret. I've already made plenty of those, Grant said. One more won't kill me. He left the church and drove straight to Charlie Morrison's store. If he was going to need witnesses, Charlie was the obvious choice. The man had known his family for 30 years and had never been one for gossip or judgment. Charlie was stocking shelves when Grant walked in. He took one look at Grant's face and set down the crate he was holding. What's happened? I'm getting married, Saturday afternoon. I need you to be there. Charlie's eyebrows shot up. To Miss Hale? Yes. Well, Charlie rubbed his jaw. That's quick. It's necessary. Is she? Charlie paused delicately. No, she's not pregnant, Grant said flatly. We're getting married because the town won't leave us alone otherwise, and because Pastor Hendricks made it clear that if we don't, they'll try to take Rosie away. So we're doing what we have to do. Charlie was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, I'll be there. And Grant, for what it's worth, I think you're making the right choice. That woman loves your daughter. That's worth more than any amount of propriety. Thanks, Charlie. You'll need a ring, though. Even a practical marriage needs at least that much ceremony. Grant hadn't thought about a ring. The one he'd given Lila was buried with her. I don't have... Hold on. Charlie disappeared into the back room and returned with a small box. Inside was a simple silver band, unadorned but well made. My mother's. She died last year, and I've been keeping it here, not knowing what to do with it. She'd want it to go to someone who needs it. Grant took the ring carefully. It was warm from Charlie's hand, worn smooth by years of wear. I can't just take this. You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you. Consider it a wedding gift. Charlie closed Grant's fingers around the box. Go on home now. You've got a wedding to prepare for. Grant rode home with the ring in his pocket, and a sense of unreality settling over him like fog. 4 days ago, he'd been a widower struggling to reconnect with his daughter. Now he was about to become a husband again, to a woman he barely knew but had somehow come to depend on more than he'd thought possible. He found Mercy in this kitchen, teaching Rosie how to knead dough. The child's small hands were covered in flour, and she was giggling as Mercy showed her how to push and fold the sticky mass. They both looked up when Grant entered, and something passed between him and Mercy, an acknowledgement of what was coming, what they'd agreed to. Saturday, he said, 2 o'clock. Pastor Hendricks will come here with witnesses. Mercy nodded slowly. I'll need a dress, something appropriate. You don't have to. I'm not getting married in my work clothes, Grant. I have some money saved. I can go to the dressmaker tomorrow. Use mine, whatever you need. He pulled out his wallet and laid bills on the table. Get whatever makes you feel right about this. Mercy looked at the money, then at him. Thank you. They spent the evening in careful normalcy, dinner, dishes, Rosie's bath, and bedtime. But underneath it all was a countdown neither of them acknowledged out loud. 2 more days of being separate people. 2 more days before they bound their lives together in front of God and witnesses. That night, lying in his bed alone, Grant thought about Lila, about the day they'd married, a real wedding with flowers and music and half the county in attendance. Lila in a white dress, radiant and laughing, the way she'd kissed him at the altar, fierce and possessive, claiming him in front of everyone. This wedding would be nothing like that. No joy, no celebration, just 2 people choosing survival over solitude. But maybe that was enough. Maybe love wasn't the only thing worth building a life on. Friday morning, Mercy rode into town with the money Grant had given her. She returned late in the afternoon with a package wrapped in brown paper and a look on her face that Grant couldn't quite read. Not happy exactly, but something like determined peace. The dress? He asked. The dress, she confirmed. Mrs. Patterson sold me one of her daughters. It needed altering, but it'll do. Can I see it? Tomorrow, when it matters. She carried the package upstairs, and Grant heard the nursery door close. That night at dinner, Rosie seemed to sense something was different. She refused to eat, refused to sit still, and finally burst into tears for no reason Grant could identify. Mercy scooped her up and walked her around the kitchen, singing softly, but the child wouldn't be comforted. "What's wrong with her?" Grant asked. "She knows," Mercy said. "Children always know when the adults around them are anxious. She's picking up on our tension." "Should we tell her? About tomorrow?" "She's 2 years old, Grant. She won't understand. All we can do is show her that nothing essential is changing, that we're still here, still steady, still hers." But that wasn't quite true, and they both knew it. Everything was changing. By tomorrow evening, Mercy would be his wife. Rosie would have a mother, officially. They would be a family in the eyes of the law and the church, even if they felt like strangers play-acting at domestic bliss. Grant lay awake most of Friday night, listening to the house settle around him. Tomorrow. Tomorrow he would stand in his own parlor and promise to honor a woman he'd known for less than 2 months. Tomorrow he would take on responsibility, not just for Rosie, but for Mercy too. Her welfare, her reputation, her future. It felt too big, too impossible. But then, so had coming home. So had accepting that his daughter loved another woman more than she loved him. So had going into a flooded creek to save a child he'd once abandoned. Impossible things kept happening anyway. Maybe this was just one more. Saturday dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a mockery of Grant's tangled emotions. He rose early, washed, shaved with extra care, and dressed in his best suit, the one he'd worn to Lila's funeral. It felt wrong, but it was the only formal clothing he owned. Downstairs, Mercy was already up, feeding Rosie breakfast. She wore her usual gray work dress, her hair pulled back simply. She looked tired. "You should rest," Grant said. "I can handle breakfast." "I'm too nervous to rest." She gave him a small smile. "Besides, keeping busy helps." They moved around each other carefully all morning, each absorbed in small tasks that didn't really need doing. Grant cleaned his boots 3 times. Mercy reorganized the pantry. Rosie toddled between them, sensing the strangeness but unable to articulate it. At 1 o'clock, Mercy went upstairs to change. Grant heard water running, heard soft footsteps, heard the creak of floorboards as she moved around the nursery. He stood in the kitchen, his heart pounding, and tried to remember how to breathe. At 1:45, hoofbeats sounded in the yard. Grant looked out to see Pastor Hendricks dismounting, followed by Charlie Morrison and Mrs. Patterson, the widow the pastor had mentioned days ago. All 3 wore their Sunday best, somber and formal. Grant opened the door before they could knock. "Pastor, Charlie, Mrs. Patterson." "Grant!" Hendricks looked past him into the house. "Is Miss Hale ready?" "She's upstairs. She'll be down shortly." They filed into the parlor, and Grant suddenly saw his home through their eyes. The worn furniture, the simple decorations, the evidence of a household held together by necessity rather than luxury. It wasn't much, but it was clean and honest and real. Footsteps on the stairs. Everyone turned. Mercy descended slowly, one hand on the rail, wearing a dress Grant had never seen before. It was dove gray, simple but well made, with long sleeves and a high collar. Her hair was down, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She'd done something to her face, nothing dramatic, just enough to make her eyes look bigger, her lips softer. She looked young and scared and heartbreakingly beautiful. Grant's breath caught. This was real. This was happening. Mercy reached the bottom of the stairs and met his eyes. He saw his own uncertainty reflected back at him, but also something else. Resolve. The same strength that had carried her into the flood. The same courage that had made her stay when staying was hard. "You look—" Grant couldn't finish. "Acceptable?" Mercy supplied. "Beautiful," he corrected. A flush rose in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. "Thank you." Pastor Hendricks cleared his throat. "Shall we begin?" They arranged themselves in the parlor, Grant and Mercy standing before the empty fireplace, facing each other, while Hendricks stood between them holding his Bible. Charlie and Mrs. Patterson took positions as witnesses, and Rosie sat on the floor playing with a rag doll, oblivious to the adult ceremony happening above her head. "Dearly beloved," Hendricks began, his voice formal and distant. We are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Grant barely heard the words. He was too focused on Mercy's face, on the way her hands trembled slightly, on the rapid pulse beating in her throat. She looked terrified. He probably looked the same. "Marriage is not to be entered into lightly," Hendricks continued, "but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Grant wondered if God was watching this ceremony, wondered what he thought of two broken people stitching their lives together, not for love, but for survival. "Grant Holloway, do you take Mercy Hale to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Grant's mouth was dry. He swallowed once, then said, "I do." "Mercy Hale, do you take Grant Holloway to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Mercy's voice was steady. "I do." "The ring?" Grant fumbled in his pocket and produced the simple silver band Charlie had given him. He held it out, and Pastor Hendricks blessed it with words Grant didn't process. Then Hendricks handed it back. "Place it on her finger and repeat after me. With this ring, I thee wed." Grant took Mercy's left hand, her palm still bandaged from the flood, and slid the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. "With this ring, I thee wed," he repeated. Hendricks looked between them. "By the power vested in me by God and the state of Texas, I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "You may kiss your bride." Grant and Mercy stared at each other. Neither moved. The kiss hadn't been discussed, hadn't been planned for, but everyone was watching, waiting for this final seal on their union. Grant leaned forward slowly, giving Mercy time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. He pressed his lips to hers gently, briefly, and tasted salt, tears, though he didn't know if they were hers or his. When he pulled back, Mercy's eyes were bright, her chin lifted. His wife. This stranger, this woman who sang his dead wife's lullaby, was now legally his. "Congratulations," Charlie said, breaking the silence. "I hope you'll both be very happy." Mrs. Patterson nodded her agreement, though her expression suggested she had doubts. Pastor Hendricks closed his Bible with a decisive snap. "I'll file the paperwork with the county on Monday. As far as the law is concerned, you're now Mr. and Mrs. Grant Holloway." He looked at Mercy. "I trust you understand the responsibilities that come with that name." "I do," Mercy said quietly. "Good." Hendricks collected his things. "Charlie, Mrs. Patterson, shall we go?" They filed out, offering brief congratulations and awkward handshakes, and then Grant and Mercy were alone in the parlor with Rosie still playing on the floor, unaware that her world had just shifted beneath her. Grant looked at his wife. God, his wife, and tried to think of something to say, something meaningful or comforting or at least appropriate, but his mind was blank. Mercy spoke first. "Well, that's done." "Yeah." Grant touched the ring on her finger, turning it slightly. "Are you all right?" "I don't know. Ask me tomorrow." She pulled her hand back gently. "I should start dinner, unless you'd rather—" "No, we do everything like normal. Nothing changes except the paperwork." "Everything changes?" Mercy corrected softly, "but we'll pretend it doesn't, for now." She picked up Rosie and carried her to the kitchen, leaving Grant alone in the parlor where he'd just gotten married for the second time in his life. The first wedding had been full of joy and hope and love so fierce it had scared him. This wedding had been full of fear and necessity and quiet courage. He didn't know which kind would last longer. He just knew he'd made his choice, and now he had to live with it, for better or worse. Until death did them part. The evening passed in careful silence. They moved through the rituals of dinner and dishes like actors who'd forgotten their lines, each hyper-aware of the other's presence, but uncertain how to acknowledge it. The ring on Mercy's finger caught the lamplight every time she moved, a small bright reminder of what they'd done. Rosie seemed calmer now that the tension had broken, and she ate her supper without fuss, occasionally looking between Grant and Mercy as if trying to understand what had changed. After the meal, Mercy took Rosie upstairs for her bath. Grant stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the sounds of splashing water and the child's delighted squeals, and felt like an outsider in his own home. He was a husband again, but he didn't know what that meant anymore. Didn't know if he was supposed to follow them upstairs, assert some new claim to domestic intimacy, or keep the careful distance they'd maintained before. He chose distance. Went out to the porch and sat in the gathering darkness, smoking a cigarette he'd bummed off Charlie weeks ago and forgotten about. The tobacco was stale, but it gave him something to do with his hands. The door opened behind him. Mercy stepped out, still wearing the gray dress, her hair beginning to escape its pins. She stood beside him, not quite touching, both of them looking out at the moonlit yard. "Rosie's asleep," she said. "Good. Grant, we need to talk about sleeping arrangements." His stomach tightened. "We don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with." "I know, but people will ask. Mrs. Patterson, the pastor, they'll want to know that this is a real marriage, not just a legal convenience. If I keep sleeping in the nursery on that cot, people will notice." "So what are you suggesting?" Mercy was quiet for a long moment. "I could move my things into the master bedroom, into Lila's room. I could sleep there, and you could too, and we could just exist in the same space. Nothing more than that. Just enough to make it believable." Grant's chest tightened at the thought of someone else sleeping in Lila's bed, wearing Lila's ring. No, not Lila's ring. Charlie's mother's ring. Mercy's ring now. He had to stop thinking of everything through the lens of his dead wife. "All right," he said, "but the nursery door stays open. If Rosie needs you in the night, I'll hear her. I always do." Mercy turned toward him. "This doesn't have to be more complicated than we make it, Grant. We're two people sharing a house, a child, and now a bed. Everything else can stay the same." "Can it?" "It has to. Otherwise, we'll drive ourselves mad trying to figure out what we're supposed to be to each other." She was right. Grant nodded and stubbed out his cigarette. "I'll help you move your things." It didn't take long. Mercy's possessions fit in one small trunk and a carpet bag. They carried them upstairs together, and Grant opened the master bedroom door for the first time since coming home. The room looked exactly as he'd left it. The bed made with military precision, Lila's hairbrush still on the dresser, her shawl hanging on a hook by the window. Mercy stopped in the doorway, her face carefully neutral. "Do you want me to pack her things away?" "No, not yet." Grant set her trunk down at the foot of the bed. "Just find space around them for now." Mercy nodded and began unpacking quietly. Grant watched her move through the room that had been his and Lila's, placing her simple dresses in the wardrobe beside Lila's finer things, setting her hairbrush on the dresser next to Lila's silver one. She moved carefully, respectfully, like someone arranging flowers on a grave. "I'll sleep on this side," Mercy said, gesturing to the left side of the bed. "Away from the window, unless you prefer—" "That side is fine." Grant had always slept on the right, close to the window where he could watch the sunrise. Lila had liked the left side, liked being tucked against the wall where she felt safe. Now Mercy would sleep there, in the space his wife had occupied. The thought should have felt like betrayal. Instead, it just felt inevitable. They prepared for bed in awkward silence, taking turns changing in the small adjoining room, careful not to see too much of each other. When Mercy finally climbed into bed wearing a plain cotton nightgown, Grant stood by the window for a long moment before joining her. The bed felt too small and too large at the same time. They lay on their respective sides, a careful 12 inches between them, both staring at the ceiling. "Grant?" Mercy's voice was soft in the darkness. "Yeah?" "Thank you for choosing this instead of sending me away. I didn't do it for you. I did it for Rosie." "I know, but thank you anyway." They fell silent again. Somewhere down the hall, Rosie made a small sound in her sleep, and Grant felt Mercy tense beside him, ready to go to the child if needed. But the sound didn't repeat, and slowly Mercy relaxed. Grant lay awake long after her breathing evened out into sleep. He stared at the ceiling and thought about the vows he'd made, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. He'd made those same vows to Lila 8 years ago, full of certainty and hope. Now he'd made them again, full of nothing but grim necessity. But maybe that was more honest. Maybe marriages built on need were stronger than marriages built on passion. Passion burned out. Need endured. He turned his head and looked at Mercy's sleeping profile. The curve of her cheek, the dark fan of her lashes, the slight part of her lips. She looked younger in sleep, less burdened. He wondered what she'd been like before life broke her, before her father was shot, before her husband died, before she learned that survival meant swallowing your pride and accepting whatever scraps of dignity the world offered. "I'll try to be worth it," he whispered. "I'll try to be the kind of husband who deserves what you're giving up." She didn't hear him, but he'd said it anyway, a promise to the darkness and to himself. Eventually, he slept. The first week of marriage passed in strange domesticity. During the day, nothing changed. They worked side by side as they always had, managing the household, caring for Rosie, rebuilding what the storm had damaged. But at night, they climbed the stairs together, changed in the same room, slept in the same bed with that careful space between them. They didn't touch, barely spoke, just existed in parallel, two separate people trying to pretend they were one unit. On the 8th day, a letter arrived. Grant found it when he rode out to check the northern fence line and discovered a rider waiting by the property marker. The man was elderly, weathered, wearing the kind of clothes that spoke of long miles and hard living. "You Grant Holloway?" the man asked. "I am. Got a letter for you, from Miriam Price in San Antonio. She paid me to deliver it personal-like, said it was important." Grant took the letter, frowning. He knew Miriam Price by reputation. She ran a boarding house in San Antonio and had a finger in every piece of business and gossip in the southern part of the state. But he'd never met her, never had dealings with her. "Thank you," he said, and the rider tipped his hat and rode off. Grant opened the letter standing in the middle of the dusty road. "Dear Mr. Holloway, you don't know me, but I knew your father, and I knew Amos Hale even better. Amos and I corresponded for years before his death, and he mentioned his daughter Mercy often. When I heard through mutual acquaintances that a young woman named Mercy Hale had found employment at your ranch, I knew I had to write. What you may not know, what Mercy herself may not fully understand, is that Amos Hale saved your father's ranch 20 years ago when a bad drought nearly destroyed everything. Your father was weeks from losing the land when Amos stepped in with a loan that kept you afloat. He never asked for repayment, never mentioned it again. He believed neighbors helped neighbors, and that was the end of it. Amos died believing his daughter would inherit his small farm, but complications after the war left her with nothing. She has every right to claim debt against your family, every right to demand repayment for what her father gave. But knowing Mercy as I do through her father's stories, I suspect she's never mentioned any of this to you. She's proud, that one. Too proud for her own good sometimes. I write this not to cause trouble, but to ensure you understand what kind of woman is living under your roof. She's the daughter of a man who saved your family's legacy and asked for nothing in return. She deserves better than charity or pity. She deserves honor. Treat her accordingly. Yours truly, Miriam Price. Grant read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. Mercy's father had saved the Holloway Ranch, had given Grant's father the means to survive when no one else would. And Mercy had never said a word, had accepted employment as a maid in the house her father had helped save, had worked for room and board without wages, had married Grant knowing she could have demanded repayment instead. He rode home faster than was safe, the letter clutched in his fist. He found Mercy in the garden, teaching Rosie how to pull weeds without damaging the vegetables. Both of them had dirt on their hands and dresses, and Rosie was chattering in her half-language, pointing at bugs and plants with equal enthusiasm. "Mercy," Grant said, dismounting, "we need to talk." She looked up, saw his face, and immediately stood. "Rosie, stay here and pick the pretty yellow flowers for Mama, all right?" The child nodded and toddled off toward a patch of dandelions. Mercy wiped her hands on her apron and faced Grant, her expression wary. "What's happened?" Grant held out the letter. "Read this." She took it carefully, her eyes scanning the page. He watched her face as she read, saw the color drain from her cheeks, saw her hands begin to tremble, saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. When she finished, she folded the letter precisely and handed it back. "I didn't know Miriam was going to write to you. But you knew about the rest of it. About what your father did for mine. Yes. And you never thought to mention it? Mercy's jaw tightened. Why would I? Your father repaid that debt through kindness to my father over the years. Meals shared, labor traded, friendship given. Money isn't the only currency that matters, Grant. You could have demanded repayment when you showed up looking for work. You could have walked in here with legal claim to half this ranch. And what good would that have done? I couldn't run a ranch alone. I had no skills beyond housework and singing. All I wanted was a place to exist without judgment, and your home gave me that. She met his eyes. I didn't come here to collect a debt. I came here because I was starving and desperate, and you had a child who needed someone. That's all. That's not all, Grant said roughly. You're Amos Hale's daughter. You're the child of the man who saved my family's legacy. And I've had you sleeping in a nursery on a cot, paying you nothing for 4 months, treating you like someone who needed work and found it, Mercy interrupted. Don't make this into something it's not. I knew what I was agreeing to. I made my choices with clear eyes. And now? Now that we're married? What do you want, Mercy? She was quiet for a long moment, watching Rosie gather dandelions with serious concentration. I want what I've always wanted. A place to belong. A child to love. A life that's mine. You've already given me that. I've given you my name in a wedding that felt more like a funeral. You deserve better. Maybe, but this is what I have, and I'm grateful for it. She looked back at him. Don't pity me, Grant. Don't start treating me like I'm fragile or noble or anything other than what I am, a woman doing the best she can with what she's got. Grant wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was worth more than survival and scraps of dignity, but before he could find the words, shouting erupted from the road. They both turned. A group of riders was approaching fast, 6 or 7 men on horseback, led by someone Grant recognized with sinking dread. Jacob Thornton, Mrs. Kellen's nephew, a bully who'd made a career out of other people's misery. "Holloway!" Thornton shouted as he reined up in front of the house. "We need to talk." Grant moved to stand between the riders and his family. "Talk then, but keep a civil tongue in your head. My wife and daughter are present." "Wife." Thornton spat the word like it was poison. "That's what we came about. Word is you married your housemaid to shut up the gossip. Word is you've been living in sin for months, and now you're trying to make it look respectable with a quick ceremony. My marriage is none of your business. It is when it affects the moral character of this county. We've got standards, Holloway. Can't have rich men keeping mistresses and calling them wives just to silence decent folk." "Watch your mouth," Grant said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "That's my wife you're slandering." "Is it? Or is it just the woman who was convenient when you needed someone to warm your bed?" Thornton's eyes flicked to Mercy. "My aunt says you're a schemer, girl. Says you wormed your way into this house and turned a good man against his own family." Mercy stepped forward before Grant could stop her. "Your aunt tried to frame me for theft when she realized Mr. Holloway was grateful for my help with his daughter. She planted evidence, made false accusations, and was dismissed accordingly. If she's told you a different story, she's lying. You calling my aunt a liar? I'm stating facts. If the truth makes her a liar, that's her problem, not mine." Thornton's face went red. "You've got a mouth on you for a maid playing at being a lady." "I'm not playing at anything. I'm Mrs. Holloway now, legally married before witnesses and a man of God. If you have a problem with that, take it up with Pastor Hendricks." "Maybe we will. Maybe we'll ask the pastor if that wedding was done proper-like, or if Holloway paid him to rush it through before anyone could object." Grant's hands curled into fists. "Get off my property, now." "Or what? You going to fight all of us? You might be rich, Holloway, but you're still just one man." "He's not alone," the voice came from behind them. Grant turned to see Charlie Morrison riding up with 3 other men from town, all of them armed, all of them wearing expressions that made it clear they weren't here to watch. "Charlie," Grant said, surprised. "Heard Thornton was planning to cause trouble." Charlie dismounted and stood beside Grant. "Figured you might need some backup." "This isn't your fight, Morrison," Thornton said. "It is when you're threatening a decent man and his family. Grant's marriage is legal and proper. I witnessed it myself. If you've got objections, take them to the county magistrate, but you're not going to ride onto his land and intimidate his wife." The other men with Charlie murmured agreement, and suddenly the odds didn't look so good for Thornton's group. The bully looked around, saw he was outnumbered by men with actual principles, and spat in the dirt. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is," Charlie replied calmly. "You've had your say. Now ride on before someone gets hurt." Thornton glared at Grant, then at Mercy, then wheeled his horse around and galloped off. His men followed, kicking up dust as they disappeared down the road. Charlie waited until they were out of sight, then turned to Grant. "You all right?" "Yeah, thanks for coming." "That's what neighbors do." Charlie tipped his hat to Mercy. "Mrs. Holloway, I'm sorry you had to endure that." "It's not the first time I've been called worse," Mercy said quietly. "But thank you for standing with us." "Like I said, neighbors help neighbors." Charlie glanced at the other men with him. "We should get back to town, spread the word that the Holloways are under protection. Make it clear that anyone who troubles you will answer to more than just Grant." After they left, Grant and Mercy stood in the yard, both of them shaking from adrenaline. Rosie toddled over with her hands full of wilted dandelions, oblivious to what had just happened. "Pretty flowers," she announced. "For Mama." Mercy knelt and accepted the offering, her hands trembling as she touched the child's cheek. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. The prettiest flowers I've ever seen." Grant watched them, his daughter and his wife, both of them marked by his choices, both of them vulnerable to the cruelty of small-minded people. He'd thought marrying Mercy would end the gossip, would protect them both. Instead, it had just focused the hatred into a sharper point. "I'm sorry," he said. Mercy looked up at him. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. For making you a target. You didn't make me anything. I chose this. And I'd choose it again." She stood, still holding Rosie's hand. "They can say whatever they want, Grant. They can believe whatever vile stories comfort them. But they can't change what's true. That we're a family now, legally and morally. That's more than gossip can touch." "Is it?" "Because it didn't feel that way when Thornton was calling you names." "Words only have the power we give them." Mercy's voice was steady. "I've survived worse than Jacob Thornton's insults. I'll survive this too." Grant reached out and touched her cheek, the first time he'd initiated physical contact since the wedding kiss. "You shouldn't have to just survive, Mercy. You should get to live." She leaned into his touch just slightly. "Then help me figure out how." They stood there in the afternoon sun, the three of them, while the dust settled and the crisis passed. Inside Grant's chest, something was shifting, something that felt dangerously close to the thing he'd sworn he wouldn't feel again. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of it. The recognition that this woman standing before him, holding his daughter's hand and accepting wilted flowers like they were treasure, was becoming essential to his happiness in ways he hadn't anticipated. That night, after Rosie was asleep, Grant and Mercy sat on the porch together. The spring air was cool, full of night sounds, crickets and distant coyotes, and the rustle of wind through new leaves. "Tell me something true," Grant said. Mercy looked at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Something about you that no one else knows. Something real." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I'm afraid all the time. Every day, every moment. Afraid I'll do something wrong and lose this. Lose Rosie. Lose my place here. Lose the first thing that's ever felt like home." "You won't lose it." "You can't promise that. Life doesn't work that way. But I appreciate you saying it anyway." She paused. "Your turn. Tell me something true." Grant looked out at the moonlit yard. "I dream about Lila sometimes. But lately when I wake up, I can't remember her face. I remember loving her, remember losing her, but the details are fading. And that terrifies me more than anything, that I'm forgetting the woman I swore I'd love forever. Maybe you're not forgetting her. Maybe you're just making room for something else. Is that what you think this is? Me making room?" "I don't know what this is," Mercy admitted. "I just know it's real, whatever we call it." Grant reached over and took her hand, carefully, giving her room to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers curled around his, rough and calloused from work, and they sat like that in the darkness, holding on. The next morning, Grant woke to find Mercy already up, but instead of finding her in the kitchen, she was still in bed, sitting with her back against the headboard, looking at something in her hands. When he stirred, she looked over. "I found these," she said softly, holding up a small bundle of letters tied with ribbon. "They were in the back of the drawer when I was putting away my things. They're from Lila." Grant's stomach dropped. "You read them?" "No, they're yours." "But Grant, I think you should read them. I think you need to." "I can't." "You can. You need to face her, really face her, before you can move forward, before we can move forward." Grant sat up, his chest tight. "What if I don't want to move forward? What if staying stuck is easier?" "It's not easier, it's just familiar." Mercy held out the letters. "Read them. I'll be downstairs with Rosie when you're ready." She left, closing the door softly behind her. Grant sat alone in the bed he'd shared with two different women, holding letters from a ghost. His hands shook as he untied the ribbon and opened the first one. "My dearest Grant, today I felt the baby move for the first time. Just a flutter, like butterfly wings against my ribs. I wanted to call you in from the fields immediately, make you put your hand on my belly, and feel this miracle with me. But I also wanted to keep it secret for just a little longer. This small, perfect thing that's just mine and hers before it becomes real to the world. I'm afraid sometimes, beloved. Afraid of childbirth, afraid of being a mother, afraid I won't be good enough for this new life we're creating." But then the baby moves again, and I remember that fear is just love in disguise. "I love you. I love this baby. I love the life we're building together, and that will be enough. Forever yours, Lila." Grant's vision blurred. He read through all the letters, 10 of them, written during Lila's pregnancy, each one full of hope and fear and love so fierce it burned through the paper. The last one was dated 2 days before Rosie was born. "My darling Grant, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. I've asked the midwife to give you these letters if I don't survive the birth. I need you to know some things. First, I'm not afraid of dying. I've lived a full life with you, loved you with everything I have, and that's more than most people get. If God calls me home tomorrow, I'll go knowing I was blessed beyond measure. Second, take care of our daughter. Love her even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. She'll need you more than she'll ever be able to say. Third, and this is the most important thing, don't waste the rest of your life grieving me. I'm giving you permission right now to love again, to find someone who makes you happy, to build a new life with someone who deserves your heart. I know you, my love. I know you'll feel guilty for moving on, like loving someone else means betraying me. But I'm releasing you from that. Love again, live again, be happy again. That's what I want for you. That's my last gift. The baby's kicking now, telling me it's time to sleep. I'll write again tomorrow, if there is a tomorrow. But if there isn't, know that I loved you with everything I was and everything I could have been. You made my life beautiful, Grant Holloway. Make your next life beautiful too, forever and always. Your Lila." Grant read the last letter 3 times before he could breathe again. Permission. Lila had given him permission to move forward, to love someone else, to stop punishing himself for surviving. She'd known him well enough to understand he'd need that release, had loved him enough to give it, even knowing she might not live to see him use it. He sat there for a long time, holding the letters, letting tears run unchecked down his face, grieving properly for the first time since Lila's death, not running from the pain but sitting with it, letting it wash over him, and finally begin to recede. When he went downstairs, Mercy was in the kitchen making breakfast, Rosie at her feet playing with measuring spoons. Mercy looked up as he entered, saw his face, and set down the pan she was holding. "Grant?" He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, awkward and unpracticed, but sincere. She stiffened in surprise, then slowly relaxed against him. "Thank you," he said into her hair, "for making me read them, for understanding what I needed even when I didn't." What did they say? That it's all right to live again. That Lila wanted me to be happy, even if that happiness looked different than what we'd planned. He pulled back to look at her face. "Mercy, I know I haven't been a real husband to you. I know this marriage was supposed to be just a practical arrangement, but I want to try. I want to figure out how to be a real family. If you're willing." Mercy's eyes shone. "What does that mean? A real family?" "I don't know yet, but maybe we could start by talking to each other, really talking. and spending time together that's not just about work or Rosie, and he hesitated, then continued. And maybe eventually being married in more than just name. Eventually? When you're ready, when we're both ready. No pressure, no timeline, just possibility. Mercy searched his face for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, the kind that transformed her from pretty to radiant. I can work with possibility. Rosie chose that moment to bang her measuring spoons together, demanding attention. They both laughed, and the tension broke. Grant picked up his daughter, swinging her in a circle until she shrieked with delight, while Mercy watched with something like joy softening her features. Over the next weeks, things shifted in small but significant ways. Grant and Mercy started having conversations that went beyond household management, about books they'd read, places they'd seen, dreams they'd had before life broke them. They worked side by side during the day and sat together on the porch at night, sometimes talking, sometimes just existing in comfortable silence. The careful space between them in bed grew smaller, though they still didn't touch beyond accidental contact. Rosie bloomed under their united attention. She started stringing words together into simple sentences, calling Grant Dada with increasing confidence and Mercy Mama with complete certainty. The child seemed to sense that her world had solidified somehow, that the adults around her had finally figured out how to be steady. The town slowly, grudgingly accepted the marriage. Some people remained hostile. Mrs. Kellen continued spreading poison wherever she could, and Thornton made occasional threats. But most folks seemed willing to let the gossip die down. Charlie Morrison's public support helped, as did Pastor Hendrick's confirmation that the wedding had been proper and legal. One evening, about 6 weeks after the wedding, Grant came in from working on the new barn to find Mercy standing in the kitchen with a piece of paper in her hands, crying. "What's wrong?" He crossed to her immediately. "Is it Rosie? Are you hurt?" "No, She laughed through her tears. "I'm fine. It's just this letter from Miriam Price. She sent money." "Money?" "From my father's estate. She says she found some old accounts he'd kept, money he'd saved over the years. It's not a fortune, but it's—" Mercy looked up at him with wonder in her eyes. "It's mine, Grant. Money that's actually mine, that I didn't have to beg for, or work for, or marry for. It's mine." Grant understood immediately what that meant to a woman who'd spent her adult life scraping by. "What do you want to do with it?" "I don't know. Save it, maybe. Or—" She paused, then said shyly, "Maybe fix up the nursery. Get Rosie proper furniture. And maybe fix up some other rooms, too. Make this house feel less like a place we're all just surviving in and more like a home." "I think that's perfect." Grant pulled her close, and this time she came willingly, easily, as if they'd been doing this for years. "We'll make it a real home, all of us together." She looked up at him, her face streaked with tears but glowing with something that looked dangerously close to happiness. "Grant, I think I might be happy. Is that allowed?" "It's required," he said, and kissed her forehead. "Lila said so in her letters, and I'm finally ready to listen." That night, for the first time since their wedding, Grant reached for Mercy's hand in bed before she fell asleep. She laced her fingers through his and held on. They lay like that in the darkness, connected but separate, learning each other's rhythms. "Tell me something you want," Grant said. "Something you've never told anyone." Mercy was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then she whispered, "I want more children. I want Rosie to have brothers and sisters. I want this house full of noise and chaos and love. I want to know what it feels like to create life instead of just surviving it." Grant's throat closed. "I want that too, someday, when we're ready." "When we're ready," she agreed. They fell asleep holding hands, and when Grant woke in the morning, Mercy was curled against his side, her head on his shoulder. He lay still, not wanting to wake her, and thought about how far they'd traveled from that first night when she'd been a stranger singing a ghost lullaby. Now she was his wife, his partner, the woman teaching him how to live again. The transformation wasn't complete. They still had awkward moments, still struggled to understand each other sometimes. But they were building something real, something that might not look like love yet, but was headed in that direction. Summer came, hot and dry, but manageable. The new barn went up, stronger than the old one. Mercy used her inheritance to renovate the house room by room, bringing color and life to spaces that had been dead for too long. Rosie turned 3 and started talking in full sentences, precocious and confident. On a warm evening in late July, Grant found Mercy sitting in the orchard behind the house, the place where they'd first talked honestly about Lila. She had a basket beside her and was sewing something small in blue. "What's that?" he asked, sitting beside her. Mercy held it up, a tiny dress for Rosie, embroidered with wildflowers. "I'm teaching myself needlework. Miriam sent me patterns. It's beautiful. It's crooked." But she smiled. "I'll get better with practice." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the evening sounds. Finally, Grant said, "I want to tell you something." "All right." "I love you." Mercy's hand stilled on her sewing. She looked at him, her eyes wide. "What?" "I love you," Grant repeated, more confident now. "Not the way I loved Lila. That was fire and passion, and the kind of love that burns bright and fast. But what I feel for you is different. It's steady. It's real. It's the kind of love that builds things instead of consuming them. And I wanted you to know." Mercy set down her sewing with trembling hands. "You don't have to say that just because I'm not saying it because of anything except that it's true. You don't have to say it back. I'm not asking for that. I just needed you to know." She looked at him for a long moment, her face working through a dozen emotions. Then she said, "I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just afraid to admit it, afraid it made me weak or foolish or—" Grant kissed her. Not the brief formal kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss. Slow and deep and full of promise. When they broke apart, Mercy was crying again, but this time it was different. These were tears of relief, of joy, of finally letting herself believe in happiness. "So what happens now?" she whispered. "Now we keep building. We keep learning each other. We keep making this house into a home." Grant touched her cheek. "And eventually, when you're ready, we give Rosie those brothers and sisters you want." Mercy laughed through her tears. "Eventually, but not tonight." "No, tonight we just sit here and be happy. That's enough." They sat in the orchard until the stars came out, talking quietly about everything and nothing. When they finally went inside, Rosie was asleep in her newly renovated room, surrounded by furniture Mercy had chosen and toys Grant had made. They stood in the doorway together, watching her sleep. "She's beautiful," Mercy whispered. "So perfect." "She has a good mother," Grant said. "The best one she could have asked for. And a good father, finally." They went to their room and got ready for bed together, no longer shy or awkward. When they climbed under the covers, there was no space between them. Mercy curled into Grant's side naturally, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "Grant?" she said sleepily. "Thank you for coming home, for choosing us. Thank you for being here when I did, for saving us all." She was asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even. Grant lay awake a while longer, looking around the room that had once been his and Lila's, was briefly his alone and was now his and Mercy's. Lila's things were still there, the hairbrush, the shawl, but they didn't feel like ghosts anymore. They felt like memories, good ones that could coexist with the new life he was building. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, from grief and cowardice to redemption and love. It hadn't been pretty, it hadn't been easy, but it had been real, and that made it worth every painful step. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The ranch still needed work. The town would always have a few people ready to gossip. Life would throw storms and floods and heartbreaks their way. But they'd face it together, Grant and Mercy and Rosie, a family forged not by blood or tradition, but by choice and courage, and the simple act of showing up for each other day after difficult day. In the darkness, Grant whispered the words one more time. "I love you, Mercy." She stirred slightly in her sleep, smiled, and held him tighter. And for the first time since Lila's death, Grant Holloway felt truly, completely at peace. The ranch stood solid under the Texas stars. The house glowed warm from within, and inside it, a broken man, a wounded woman, and a child who'd brought them together slept soundly, safe in the knowledge that they'd finally found what they'd all been searching for: home, family. Love that lasted not because it was perfect, but because they'd chosen it, fought for it, and refused to let it go. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.